And we are live. This is Dark Journalists, and tonight we have a special surprise for you. We're joined right away by the incredible Gigi Young.
Hello.
Gigi, you look fantastic. This is quite an interesting headdress going on here. We're going to get deeper into that. And don't think that I'm not in the spirit, because before the evening's over, it's going to be right there. Olivia's mask is back here.
Yes.
And after the show, we're going to hit the town in that. Olivia is joining us, the lovely Olivia. How are you?
Hi, everybody.
Unbelievable. This has been an incredible week. And Halloween, of course, very, very special show for us. It's very interesting that it seems like when we hit interesting holidays, Gigi is there. Somehow the shows just connect. And Halloween is particularly a good one, isn't it, Gigi?
It's a great one. It's a really good one. It's a time where the veil is very, very, very thin. And so we can remember our ancestors, but also our very deep past, which is really good. And time of harvest, Samhain. So this is a really good one for us. And it's a good one for us to do Cern as well, or tarot anyway.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt they're doing some very special things tonight as well. Let's face it. They're probably like leaning on the magnetosphere as we speak. It is fascinating. Tonight's episode is all about Cern Tarot. Yes, you heard it correctly. Cern Tarot. Why do those two things sound a little unusual together? Do you want to take a crack at that?
Well, they actually don't really belong together, or people wouldn't think that they would belong together. I mean, why is a scientific research company that's into particle acceleration and particle detection, why are they building tarot cards? Why are they interested in that? You know, that's the question that I think we have to start asking, is why are they into something that is so occult?
Tonight we're going to get the answer, which is, where did Cern come out of, really? And the deck actually did us a great favor. It's a very unusual setup on this, and this is the X Steganography series. This is part 33 that we're doing Cern on. Of course, Gigi and I have touched on Cern before, and I have to say the episodes on Cern are so good, but the reason they're so good is because Gigi has a unique ability to really kind of tap into the intentions behind some of the, we have so many people who do great research on the scientific end of Cern and the financial end, and I've done a lot of that research myself. But there's a lot of activity that is paranormal related to Cern, and you can't get at Cern without coming in from this kind of intuitive angle. And there have been times when we've done some research on it where Gigi has just brought forward things that were really hard to get at it. So I think she has an incredible knack for it, but she actually doesn't spend a whole lot of time, do you, Gigi, looking at Cern, because you think it's kind of like a two-way mirror in a number of ways.
Yeah, Cern is something to, it's something that warps things. And I think it's much bigger than anyone ever imagined. And it's anytime that you look at something, anytime that you're doing any remote viewing or any psychic stuff, maybe spying or whatever it is, you leave a trail and people can look at you and things like that. So anytime anybody wants to look at something like Cern or look at anything, do remember that you're not just kind of invisible. If anyone can match your energy or is trained to recognize your energy, they can also tune into where you are too. So
yeah, it's fascinating. I remember Ingo Swann is one of the best remote viewers, and remembered for his penetration book, where he actually was sent on these programs to look at space programs. And one of the things that he said was that when he was looking in on these different groups, they had other telepaths that could spot him at a certain point, not right away necessarily. And we've heard this before in terms of people who've tried to remote view the president and things like that there are actually these telepathic guardians that really shut them out. So this is actually one of those. And if you think this is science fiction, I have a great 2-part episode with Russell Targ from, who really did the pioneering work around remote viewing. And he told me in depth, I mean, we have 4 hours up there, but in addition to our normal talk, he told me in depth, and in his books, a great deal of this is there, about what SRI did for intelligence work, and they would use these remote viewers even to kind of rescue ambassadors and stuff. So on their end of things, it's a really hardcore reality, although they're determined to play it down on a regular, everyday public kind of level.
Oh, yeah. It is something that never went away, even though scientific materialism kind of poo-poos it. And there's this whole kind of milieu that does.
Yes.
Oh, these people never, ever. And they like it that way. If you have a really good psychic, a really good intuitive, a really good astrologer, the leg up that you have is incredible, because the best detector for the best reader of consciousness is consciousness itself. It's not a machine.
Right.
If you have a missing person, or if you have something else, it's not going to be a synthetic technology that can detect it. It's going to be it's going to be consciousness itself is going to be the best one to read that and detect that. And so that's why they're so coveted, and they don't want other people to know who they're working with or anything like that. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. You know, it's so interesting too, because this is such a well-developed science, and in some of the X episodes we've done, one of them in particular was the Alice episode. And Alice, of course, is the name of Alice in Wonderland, the famous child's book, one of the best children's literature books ever done, and by Lewis Carroll. And it's also the name of the other CERN, CERN Alice, which is over there in France, communicating with its counterpart in Switzerland. So they use now Alice imagery, the actual Alice, and they call various programs within it through the looking glass and things like that. So they, you know, the one thing that we did was tie in this whole Alice in Wonderland to the Orphic Circle, and Emma Britton bringing that out. And I have some quotes from Emma Britton. But this idea that in the 19th century, these major political figures, major literary figures, and societal figures were using these young women in their teens as these somnambulist trance studies. And they would actually become incredible channels, and the groups that were putting them together, this kind of secret society of occultists, would get information on state secrets, the nature of reality, just a whole wide range of things. So this is where this connection, this early connection to what we'll see later associated with CERN comes up. So one thing I want to ask you, Gigi, when looking at some of the things that we've talked about in relation to the Orphic Circle, you know, this process, when they take someone in and have them come into a somnambulist trance, and they basically can leave their body and access information based on suggestion. When you do psychic work, you don't take suggestion. You literally give yourself kind of self-suggestion, and you although you go into a trance, you're not sleepwalking.
No, I don't do it in a somnambulistic way. I've never tried, but you could do it either way. I think that you could probably get a more exact view if the psychic is aware. I think it can be maybe a little bit more refined sometimes because they're more aware of what's going on, but you don't need to be in that level of a trance. You can do it yourself. It just would take practice. Yeah.
I see. Yeah. It's interesting to me that this was such an avenue that they had at the time. And I wondered, because the people who were giving the trance readings, like, for example, when you do your trances, do you remember them when you come back?
Some I will remember. Yeah. If the information that I'm receiving is congruent with something that I already know or understand, I will remember. So there's a bit of a root there. But if I'm viewing something, or I'm doing a reading for somebody, or if I'm looking into deep history, something like that, and I don't have a lot of reference points for what I've seen, I'll completely understand it and be able to talk about it in that time. But the farther I get from that cycle of archetypes, that cycle of, or whatever it is I'm viewing, the less I can retain of it. And it's just because I don't have the lexicon for it. So it depends on my relationship with the material, really.
Oh, that's interesting.
My subconscious will, and maybe it'll percolate if I need it at a certain time. But as for, no, I mean, I do readings And I don't remember a thing that I said for a lot of, oh, you said this and that or whatever, and this happened. And I was like, I have no idea. Thank you. I have no idea. I don't know. So
we're here with Gigi Young, and Gigi is our special guest for this Halloween episode we're doing on CERN. And before I get into what CERN is, which I think is an important foundation for everyone, of course, if you watch this show, you know it quite well, but I'm going to spell it out anyway. We just did a show on Ada Lovelace, which brought CERN in, by the way, and Ada Lovelace comes up again tonight, no big surprise, who was Byron's daughter. But one of the things that I want to mention here, which is unusual since we're talking about trance, is that in the reading state that Edgar Cayce would give his readings, he would actually retain dreams during these trance states. So he was also giving a reading, simultaneously dreaming. What do you think is going on there? I mean, can you imagine giving your reading and simultaneously having a dream at the same time?
I can imagine that. I can definitely imagine that, but there's something else. There's a different depth going on.
Yeah.
And I think because Cayce did such deep time, I mean, so much of his work is Atlantis and Mu, and he did really, really precise readings on that, that I think you have to leave yourself more. You have to go to more layers.
Yes.
And I think in those layers, maybe there's experiences within experiences. Also, that time period is different than the time period that we're in now.
Right.
So we went through we're going through a whole age of, materialism and scientific materialism, and that's going to refine our consciousness. And at the end, it will actually bring us closer to it. So I think if Cayce were incarnated today, I don't think that he'd have to leave himself so much, because we have progressed since then. I think that his abilities would be different depending on the era that he incarnates into.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. There's a past life reading in relation to Cayce, which is that one of the reasons he had this great ability to actually fully leave his body was that he had been shot, and he was in the Trojan War, and he was one of these guys who got shot by an arrow, and he is dying there in the desert, but he actually doesn't die. So it's this incredibly long, drawn-out suffering. And what he does is he mentally wills himself to leave his body, and that ability to do that came easier to him as Cayce because he had this past life doing that.
Oh yeah, you retain talents and gifts from different lives, so and then you can choose to incarnate with them again as well if it serves you in that lifetime. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for gifts and talents that you just bring with you into this life. It explains a lot of prodigies and things like that.
Right, absolutely. Let's look at CERN here.
I have to
well, actually, what's fascinating about the headdress is your headdress looks a lot like CERN. Was that conscious on your part?
It was unconscious.
Doesn't it look a whole heck of a lot?
It does.
We're all going to miss that headdress the minute you take it off, What we have is a series of cameras. That's really what CERN is set up around. This is a gigantic lens, and this is the Hadron Collider at CERN in Switzerland. And its ostensible purpose is to smash particles together, sounds like a familiar theme, to try to figure out how the universe was created, okay, and to find the quote-unquote God particle, the Higgs boson, which apparently now they've claimed they did find it, but the experiments continue. When CERN is turned on, it generates such a force field that it draws on the magnetosphere and changes the magnetosphere and affects the sun. So this is something in general I think we need to keep in mind about it. It's not a lighthearted science project. It has real-world environmental impact. And so therefore, it deserves a level of scrutiny that it just does not get by the mainstream media at all. It's completely left off, except to say like, oh, those great scientists, what have they done? They're looking at the Higgs boson. And what we get with these cameras is this incredible multi-eye effect. And one of the things that Dr. Joseph Farrell has told me in relation to CERN is that CERN is the greatest user, the biggest user since 1993 of the internet. Now let's think about that for a minute. You've got Google, you've got YouTube, you've got all these different ones. How does CERN wind up being the biggest user of the internet? It's kind of remarkable when you think about it. So what they do is they send all these packets of information in these streams after they do these experiments, and it takes up a lot of the bandwidth of the internet. Really quite remarkable when you think about it. And in 1989, one of the reasons the internet was set up in the first place was because of CERN. So let's remember the great impact of this project. CERN is technically a nuclear research facility. Let's keep that in mind too. Incredibly advanced. And with an annual budget over $8 billion a year. So we know that's serious money. That's military budget style money. We're not just looking at scientists kind of, you know, noodling around with experiments in the lab, obviously.
That's terrifying.
It is Halloween after all.
That's the scariest thing I've heard all day. $1 billion.
Yeah.
Brilliant with a B, yes.
B with a B. It is fascinating, and CERN has that mystery to it. Now, by the way, there's a lot of regular scientists, people working there, and they have nothing to do with the larger purpose of CERN. They're just cogs in the wheel. And, you know, it's not a thing about we want to create villains at CERN. The thing is, it's a very non-transparent project, one. Two, as we've gone into it, it has incredible supernatural activities that are associated with it, which is quite unusual. And also, it has, as well, scientists who have tried to sue it over something called strangelets, which we'll get into tonight as well, which are these little black holes that they're afraid will start to impact the environment in a disastrous manner. And they've taken them to court and all the rest of it. So we have all these major aspects, besides which we've also seen weird occult security footage of what looks like a mock human sacrifice over at CERN. So there's all this kind of weirdness about CERN. Whenever we get close, we start getting into kind of like occult land, thinning of the veils. And this is the nature of the environment, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, if you really look at what is going on with the rituals, and then now the CERN tarot and the Kali or Shiva statue, this is really brazen.
Yes.
I mean, this is not a cult anymore. If a cult means hidden, this is not. This is like, they're very obvious. And somehow, not a lot of people are talking about it, despite it being so non-occult anymore, you know, so.
It's coming out in the open. There's no question about it. One of the things I want to do, we're going to get into this incredible set of cards, which was developed by an artist, this very interesting woman out there in the UK, Suzanne Treister. And I have her bio here. I'm going to read that to her. And I've actually sent an email to her, and she's invited on this program anytime to talk about her remarkable work on these cards. I think what we're getting at is more the kind of sentiments behind the cards. And those reveal a very unusual worldview, let's say, coming out of CERN, as does the fact that CERN wants to create and release. She was the artist in residence, and they wanted to release this set of tarot cards. And when you get into those tarot cards, as I have with Gigi, and she's really done a lot of really deep looking into it the way that I have, we start to get a hint, a message of what this is all about. But let's start with this, which is, since we're going to tie the Orphic circle to CERN, we're going to make people understand that connection, the mystical side versus the scientific side, how they merged and how one slipped under the public eye, but continued just as around the turn of the 18th into the 19th into the 20th century. And then, but that work continued, and we see it resurfacing around CERN. The person who told us about the Orphic circle is Emma Britton. Emma Hardinge Britton was a spiritualist in the 19th century who, along with Helena Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott, set up the Theosophical Society. She eventually broke, as happens very often in these organizations. She broke with Blavatsky over the Eastern tilt that Theosophy took. But Blavatsky, before that, said about her that she was the greatest trance channel she had ever met, which is quite remarkable considering who Blavatsky was. And there's a reason for that. This is a picture of Emma as a child when she was brought into the Orphic circle, and they recognized her abilities. And at first, what they did with her was, as she'll describe in these quotes, is they basically prepped her. They kept her from other kids. They had her study music. And she had a very unusual life where she didn't understand why she wasn't allowed to go and play with other kids. And it didn't dawn on her till much, much later, all the things that had been arranged in order for her to be one of the main psychic channels for the Orphic Circle, which was a group, as we described, that included people like Bulwer Lytton, and was around that we can trace all the way through the 19th century, starting in about 1830. Certainly it morphed after the 19th century, but it went on and continued, and I think we're going to find it in these Macy Conferences. But let's look now, let's start to look at some of these cards, and I will say this one quick thing about Suzanne Treister, the artist, is that she was born in the UK, in London in 1958. She studied at St. Martin's School of Art in London. She had a very illustrious career here, and she does exhibitions all over the world, France, Estonia, Sweden. She's published all these things that they're quite unusual. They're art installations that have to do with things like psychological warfare, and art installations that have to do even with things like extraterrestrials and things. So she's a very unusual character and very colorful. So when we get into her artwork, we're knowing that we're dealing with a very kind of eccentric artist that Cern sought out. But then when we see some of the themes, we can see that they're generated by other people. You know, it's certainly a team effort, I would say. That was my impression. I guess my first question for you, Gigi, is on the cards. How did you feel when you were going through those cards and spending time with them? What were your first impressions?
Yeah, lots of impressions. Every card is really its own thing, first of all. Every card is its own thing. One of the first things is that this card deck was definitely like a legacy. It was definitely worked on over a long period of time. I don't believe that it was Suzanne's complete creation, although she may have penned them. I don't believe that they were her channeling. I believe she was given these ideas and these concepts, and then she created them herself. So I do believe there's a legacy or a story. I also believe that the cards are a ritual. I believe that these tell the story of the people behind this group, this Cern group. I believe this is telling their story. It's what their ideas are. It's how they see the world.
Right.
How they see themselves.
Yeah, it's their full perspective we're getting through each and every card. And it's fascinating that you picked up on this, because there are so many issues in here to look at. The cards are an incredible education about their viewpoint, I would say, right off the bat.
Yeah, it's like a ceremony.
Yes.
Ceremonial.
The books, they literally call it Hexen 2.0. That's the name of the deck. And Hexen, I mean, has that connotation that, you know, it's a hex, basically.
It is a magic spell. There's no doubt about it. It's a magic spell for those, a riddle for those who can see, and it's in plain sight. And I encourage everybody who's interested to go on the website and look, or, you know, and just see what's up.
Yes, absolutely. We were lucky enough to get the actual decks, and Gigi and I have been looking at them over the course of the last month, basically, going into all the different ones. It is a fascinating deck, and I mean, it's quite unusual to have this format for these very unusual concepts. There's no question about it.
Very unusual, but you know what? I'm glad they did it.
Because now we have a whole different vantage point on what they're up to.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's look at this. This is this is something that she developed, I should say, outside of her work for Cern, Suzanne Treister. Why don't you take a quick look at that? We've got a couple of saucers there at the top. This is obvious alien interest throughout her work is an interesting thread, I think. Maybe one of the reasons they selected her, actually. But there's a few interesting comments in here. One says pagan algorithm, and then it says 1 million years after the internet. And on the top, it says new planet. Now, you know, in a lot of mystery schools, especially in anthroposophy and Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy, they are looking to have the wave of evolution of humanity go in a certain direction, and then eventually we create a new Jupiter and all of humanity goes into this next phase. This new planet is right in line with that, but what they have on the bottom is it says survivor, which is very unusual. And then you have basically, so it's like the saucer survived, but it doesn't look like much else did. It's an interesting key, I think, early on in her work, even outside of the cards. I thought you, specifically knowing your familiarity with the alien factor, would get a kick out of that, Gigi.
I'm into it. Yep.
Let's take a look at a couple of these cards and give me your impression of where we're going. One of the cards, I want to start with actually Aldous Huxley in the Fool role, which is I found quite unusual. Now, Huxley is the author of Brave New World. He is an incredible author, had an incredible impact on me growing up reading Brave New World, Island, which is his post-apocalyptic novel, The Doors of Perception, which are about the different ways and means to access psychic activity, including early psychedelics, but in a very reverential, as we'll see, very different from the later kind of explosion of psychedelics. And how are we doing over there, Olivia?
Doing great. So many questions coming in already.
I know. I've never seen you so busy this early. Fantastic. She's dug in. And I'll remind everyone, we have a great, huge crowd tonight. Fantastic. Of course, for Gigi Young, you wouldn't expect anything else. And you're watching Dark Journalist, go, by the way, to darkjournalist.com. Sign up for the newsletter. Stay in touch with us, because with all the social media crackdown, it's really getting ridiculous. And the only way we're going to be able to stay in touch is through those newsletters. And, you get one once a week. It's not going to clog up your inbox or anything. We'll just tell you what shows are coming up and what specials events we're doing. Now, with all that said, Aldous Huxley, here's the card, first of all. And it's a very unusual pose there for Huxley, who was a very sophisticated intellectual, and here they have him almost looking a little deranged or beaten or something. I thought that was quite unusual right off the bat. And then one thing, now Huxley comes out of elite circles, true. And if you trace back his family in the 19th century, there's some of the most sophisticated scientific figures of the era. But with the writing of Brave New World, he was completely against pharmacology. He was very worried about this incredible explosion of drugs and softening people's attitude. And he was basically, throughout his life, saying that, you can create a different type of prison, not a fascist type prison, but a prison where people are locked into and addicted to these different drugs that make them feel different ways. And in Brave New World, they have something called the feelies, where when you go to a movie, instead of going to a movie to watch it, you sit there and you feel all the thing. I mean, this is virtual reality at a heightened level. And this is 1933 when he wrote the book. So really quite remarkable vision. But it seems to me over and over again, just like his work for pacifism and all the fantastic associates that he had, like his best friend and neighbor, Krishnamurti, who was the world teacher of Theosophy. I mean, we're getting a guy who's really evolved and advanced. But it seems to me, since he came out of those elite circles, he knew this stuff, but he was against them. And he didn't like the idea of depopulation. And he didn't like this idea of like some Davos crowd running the world. So we see that what they're portraying him, for some reason, Gigi, as the fool.
Yeah, it is. This deck is a world inverted. So in this deck, the fool is really the hero. And we have the magician, which is usually the realized person, as the person that's lost. And this is, in this deck.
Leary is the magician.
Yes, Timothy Leary is, was all about psychedelics and reaching a spiritual state, not through an organic way, but discovering drugs or substances and relying on those for spirituality. And that's not how we're designed to function. And that's what obviously Huxley understood. But with this whole card deck, it's really backwards, because their idea of spirituality is always synthetic. They always turn synthetic,
right? Either
with LSD, or as we'll see later on, it's really about technology. Yeah. It's about, transhumanism, rather than actually make a quantum leap and connect with spirit, let's either synthetically create it through drugs and basically dance around the lower astral like that's real, right? Not real. That's the lower astral. That's chaos, right? Worship weird things going on in there. Or let's hook ourselves up to electrodes and plug our brain into things, and then we'll be one. This is, and the fool here, Huxley, is actually, his mindset's the hero. It's the actual way. So that's, my interpretation.
So would you say then their attitude is something like, oh, we admire your puny effort there, human?
100%. Like, what a dreamer you are. What a dream that is. We can't do that. Our only chance is we're not spiritual beings. No, we have to do drugs or hook ourselves up to a computer.
Right. Well, Timothy Leary, I'm glad you mentioned the magician. Let's get him right off the bat. This is the card for the magician, and it is fascinating. That is Leary in the middle there. Quite an unusual card. You can see the whole card here. Now, Leary famously was a major advocate for LSD, close to the CIA, good friends with Mary Meyer, who was JFK's girlfriend, who was killed by the CIA, and was an incredible kind of culture mover and a shaker. Leary practiced right here at Harvard, about 10 minutes from here. And he became the drop acid, tune in, and drop out, basically drop out of society, you can live in your mind guy that they used to kind of take the peace movement down from this very sophisticated, very intellectual movement on these different college campuses and turn it into a raging kind of drug cult where everybody dropping acid and having a great time. And there's no question that some amazing things have come out of psychedelics, but you can see that with the CIA actually developing during their MK Ultra experiments, which is going to come up in these cards too. Actually, let's do that one next. It's the Three of Swords. And this is fascinating to jump because I'll tell you what's great about working with Gigi. Now, I want to say this honestly, I don't want to embarrass Gigi, but the work that we do on the X series with the type of tuning in that she can do and the things that she finds when we're working on stuff, the X series would not be the same without you. So the remarkable work that you do is definitely appreciated.
Aw, thanks.
So let's look at that Three of Swords card. Here it is. And it's got all kinds of interesting aspects to it. MK Ultra somehow becomes the Three of Swords in here. And when we get in here, we're going to find a reference, I believe, to the Orphic Circle. By the way, many of the figures in the cards, including Ada Lovelace, of course, was in the Orphic Circle. But let's keep going here. Let's take a look. Well, first of all, let's grab some of your impressions, Gigi, on that Three of Swords card.
Yeah, well, Three of Swords is kind of a card of heartbreak and betrayal, and I feel like MK Ultra would suit that. But if you look at the cards as though they're truly tarot cards, you'll get a little lost. They're definitely doing their own thing. Yes. Looking at this and reading the words, witch doctor study and psychopharmacology, psychosurgery, electrodes, psychometric drugs, children's summer camps, rapid hypnotic induction, children's summer camps, rapid hypnotic induction.
Fascinating. Rapid hypnotic induction is interesting also because this is saying they develop a method to put you in trance absolutely with the snap of a finger. And the children part, again, we're getting that overlay of this Orphic Circle where they developed Emma Britton to work for basically the British Prime Minister and all the glitterati of the London society at the time. And they would put her into these trances and she would give them this information. And sometimes some of these sessions would go awry because 99% of the time she didn't remember. But one of the things that she says in her biography is that she woke up in the middle of one of these and it was like incredible poltergeist. We call this Apotheum on this program because it's this effect that comes in out of this type of work, whether it's conjuring work or this kind of strange advanced technology work, or some of the things that the mystery schools did back in the Egyptian Book of the Dead times. This wild kind of effect creates this poltergeist, bringing these things through. And she woke up, and there were beings that in the room with the circle. So they had all the people there. They had the prime minister there, and these beings had shown up, and just holding the beings in that room, everything was flying around the room like just crazy chaos. And the person who was running the session told her, go back to sleep, go back to sleep. You're not supposed to see this, basically. And she was so freaked out that she had to get out of there. So this is very interesting to me, the reference that you picked up on. I'm going to give you incredible credit for finding that children's summer camps thing so unusual. And it is quite fascinating. They have a few other references in here. Witch doctor study. That struck me as weird. What did you think of that?
I have made my way around a few YouTube documentaries on MK Ultra.
Yes.
I never heard of that one. I haven't heard of the witch doctor study. Did you look into it at all? Is it about fracturing, or what is that?
It's very interesting. Well, generally, of course, the witch doctor is the medicine man of the tribe, but witch doctor in general can be seen as sort of the negative version, like the negative shaman. That's where the witch doctor association is. My guess is she's referencing in the CIA files, as they have done, all kinds of studies relating to magic, including, Richard Allen Miller was on this program who had done a number of experiments in the 80s for the CIA. And one of the experiments that they sent him to do was to go spend time with this Navajo medicine man who could control the weather by making sand designs or petroglyphs. So the weather would change based on the fact that he did this. And they were absolutely fascinated with his weather modification using this ancient, Native American tradition. So that type of thing, although we don't know specifically what witch doctor study that Suzanne and the Cern cards are referencing in there, my guess is this is the thing. It's like when they study the Dogon or they study Noah's Ark. They're going into that indigenous field to try to figure out what kind of magic they have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's a big difference between, and I want to just say this because I think that people hear about the Orphic circle and they get very creeped out. There's a really big difference between recognizing a psychic child and I think maybe raising them in a way where they're able to accept their gifts, and maybe something like that, where something like this card and maybe what's connected to Cern, which is giving substances to people to force them into trance, forcing them to do things against their will. And there's a contrast here that you can see with these words like brainwashing, electrodes, psychometric drugs. That's different than natural psychic development.
Absolutely.
And the information that you get from somebody who is forced to develop that way as a psychic, or they want control of the psychic so badly that they're just giving them drugs, that's not going to go into anything high. That's going to go into the lower astral, and you're just going to connect with garbage, because that's not how psychic ability works. So that's
fascinating. It is really interesting. And with your own abilities, would you say, although it was a long process, would you say that you recognized them quite young?
Yeah, my abilities were lunar and subtle. So I had a lot of clairsentience and claircognizance, and I didn't believe I was psychic because I didn't have clairvoyance or clairaudience. But I absolutely, I was tuning into things.
Okay, so it was obvious to you.
It was, yeah.
There's a lot. I've studied Emma Britton extensively, and I always find a lot of crossover with her story and yours in a lot of ways. And I think that we've looked into a little bit, although we won't do this episode on it, where some of that background that you have with this Corson family gives us some idea of how you may have been utilized had you sort of had not a few things happen that got you into a different part of the country and all the rest. So that I find really quite fascinating, and we will explore it, of course, with your very interesting course and background landing right in the middle of the X series as it was happening. Of course, I was studying Hiram course, or I was looking. It's interesting when you look at the course and background, Gigi. It must be fascinating for you, because me looking at it as a researcher and looking at these people who were into psychic activity, who helped Blavatsky write ISIS Unveiled, who were involved around CIA activities, who came forward about the JFK assassination. I mean, it's quite an interesting family line.
It's a very interesting family line, and it explains a lot. It explains a lot.
Yeah, the picture's getting clearer.
Yeah.
Let's look at a quote from Emma Britton. And this is her trying to give us some idea, because remember, even at the end of her life, this is from Ghostland, but even when she's writing her autobiography at the end, she still has a vow of secrecy with them, that she will not talk about all of the things that happened, nor all the people that are involved, but we get a few of them out of her, and she puts the Orphic circle on the map, and she tells us that they, to the public, would be referenced as the Ghost Club, and that when they referred to each other, they called them each other Mercury. That's how they were part of Mercury, which is also very interesting, considering some things that we have coming up. Ghostland, page 284. When quite young, in fact, before I became acquainted with certain parties who sought me out and professed a desire to observe the somnambulistic tendencies for which I was then remarkable, I found my new associates to be ladies and gentlemen, mostly persons of noble rank. And during a period of several years, I and many other young persons assisted at their sessions in the quality of somnambulists. We found out that this is majority were girls between the ages of 11 and 15. Or somnambulists or mesmeric subjects. This is very important, because we have to understand in mesmerism, magnetism, and his work with animal magnetism, that's where we get hypnosis. It's one sliver of the work that he was doing, which was far more wide-ranging. But here she brings it forward. She said it was one of their leading regulations never to permit the existence of the society to be known or the members thereof named. In terms of the members, until they passed from earth to the higher life. It is in virtue of this last clause that I am at liberty to say that Lord Lytton, the Earl of Stanhope, and Lieutenant Morrison, better known as Zadkiel, who is in Ghostland, this book, the author of Art Magic, belonged to this society, the Orphic Circle. So she's telling us there that, she's giving us that story, that she's doing these readings and they are bringing her out, and it's noble rank. It's some of the high people in society. Here's another quote to give us an idea of what she's getting at. Never understood by those around me. It was only in years after, when I became called and associated with a secret society of occultists and attended their sessions in London as one of their clairvoyant and magnetic subjects, that I myself began to comprehend why a young girl, fairly educated and blessed with many advantages, should be branded with such peculiarities of disposition as must inevitably shut her off from all companionship with children of her own age and standing. Quite fascinating when you think about it, since she finishes it off with the society of occultists to whom I can now only allude, and who are named in Ghostland as the Orphic Circle. Obtain knowledge by means I am not at liberty to mention of those persons whose associations they desired. Gigi, by means I'm not at liberty to mention. What do you think that is?
Well, I guess that would be their techniques.
Okay, yeah.
Or she didn't want to say maybe that she was psychically, or maybe it's the exact techniques, I'm not sure, but definitely that she was getting things psychically.
Interesting. What I was trying to get at with that, oddly enough, was I wonder if she wasn't referring to the fact of drug use, if they weren't actually giving her drugs to move her into this altered state.
Well, I mean, maybe that could be there, but that would be, I think that would be undesirable for information, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. The way I see this is when she looks back on the Orphic circle predominantly, she doesn't see them as evil. She actually sees that they helped her develop her skills. And by the time she was 15, actually a little earlier, because her dad died and he was the connection to the Orphic circle for her. The mother actually didn't know a great deal about it. And she also had this reputation, Emma Britton, of her grandfather was known as the Wizard of Wales. So they knew right off the bat that she was going to have these special abilities and tracked her and moved her into this society. So I see what you're saying, though. If she remembers them in this kind of fond fashion, if they actually advanced her spirituality on some level, then they probably weren't using drugs.
I think that if, like, personally, unless there was some intense hypnotic suggestions involved that said, you'll have good feelings about us. I mean, it's very possible that was the case. But it's not, you don't need those kind of things to be psychic, especially when you're 14 or 11. That's a time when your abilities can be very strong. They're at a certain phase. I don't think that you would necessarily need to do that. You really endanger the person and almost everybody in the circle, because you can't control your energy. You can't control what's going on and what's happening. So, I mean, I'd like to think that there are methods and things going on where that's not done, because it's just not good for anyone involved.
Right. If anything, it can actually kind of screw up their later development.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially, you have to be very precise. If you want good psychic information, you have to be very, very precise. And if you're going to take a drug, that's like a baseball bat. That's just trying to write your name with a basable bat. That's not writing your name with a pen. So there's some finesse with it.
There's nothing subtle about that, for sure. There's a lot of X Steganography in the cards. This is something that I noticed. I'm going to jump to the Tower card, since the reference, we're going to kind of weave the Orphic Circle testimony in with these cards, and it's going to land us at these Macy Conferences, which is going to connect the two stories. So we're moving toward that. I want to remind everyone that you're watching Dark Journalists. It's great to have everyone here. This is episode 33 of the X series, where we study the X Steganography through history and its relationship to secret government programs on one side and the mystery school secrecy through centuries on the other. And we get into groups like the Theosophical Society, who left a fantastic legacy of spiritual information through the work of Annie Besant and Helena Blavatsky, and of course Rudolf Steiner's work, which through anthroposophy and spiritual science gave us biodynamic farming, eurythmy, of course the Waldorf schools for early childhood education. I mean, these groups had a major impact on our daily lives, and so the mystery schools coming forward and sort of giving this information out and having the society absorb it in a fashion that they could accept it is really a major study of what we're doing here with the X series. We're with Gigi Young, and at gigiyoung.com. Gigi, you're doing a intuitive development course right now. I've been hearing amazing things about it, but can you tell me just a little bit about it?
Yeah, so I have a course. I teach intuition development. I'm working on the second level now, but the first level's out. It's called Inner Mystic, and it focuses on basically discovering what your clairs are, what your abilities are, and the right kind of techniques. And it's kind of like an introduction. So I got that.
Fantastic. Wow. If you want to develop those abilities if you feel like you have them. I can tell you from working with Gigi, it's remarkable the abilities that she has, and I can't think of a better teacher for these things. Miss Olivia.
I just wanted to say that I think it was last time that Gigi was on, Beau Krills was having some astral attacks, and they have stopped because of Gigi's advice. So much better. And in 6 years of astral attacks, you were the first psychic that actually came to his aid. So thank you from Beau Krills.
Oh, well, thank you, Beau. And remember that you can always go back to that. Remember, you can always go back to that technique and reuse it.
Wow,
Yeah.
amazing. It's an interesting thing about astral attacks, since that came up there, which is, I was reading actually a lecture that Steiner was giving, and he was giving this lecture around, I always read those lectures that came out around World War I, because he got a little pessimistic about what the mystery schools were doing. He didn't think the pace was fast enough. And he was like, if we fail now, it'll come back in 100 years. But one of the things that he said, when he was doing this back and forth, he got a question which was like, well, if you know these mystery school secrets, why don't you just tell us, And he said, well, the person who revealed this particular secret, he was talking about something in relation to the eighth sphere. He said they would so instantly become a victim of psychic attack that it would be almost impossible, because all of these forces would come on them the minute that they opened their mouth. So that level of secrecy and the guards against it, it is quite fascinating that they have to put things in place when you have Steiner or somebody like that come forward. They have to develop a kind of astral armor, just like in the work that you do. You've done all of these one-on-one type of psychic readings, and now you're doing this course and becoming more of a public figure with your psychic work. That invites a kind of outside scrutiny. So you develop your own kind of astral shield in doing this.
Yeah, you have to develop a way to digest and transform energy. And in order to do that, you have to understand who you are. And there's certain universal truths that you have to understand as well. And that's probably what Steiner's talking about, is that there's certain things that you have to know about this world, like universal laws that translate to things about you personally as well. And once you get those, then you have the toolkit to start processing things larger than you. But if you're not there, then you may not recognize when something nasty is yours and when it's not. And so it is a little bit complex, but just always remember that whatever you experience psychically is going to be an extension of whatever's going on in your mind and your emotions. So that's how you immediately phase shift out of whatever's going on, is you change whatever you're experiencing, because resonance always determines what you experience. So.
Resonance. So you're resonating at a certain level, and then you attract the thing that you're resonating to.
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes if you're really stuck with something, there can be a personal reason as to why you're still perceiving a certain negative emotion or feeling. And in those cases, you just let it wash through you, and you just let it flow, right? You just let it, we let everything in, we let it flow, and know that if you need to know something, you'll know it, and know that you're higher than that. You kind of flip into a higher mode and you just let things flow. And so it's learning how to deal with energy in kind of experimenting in those different ways, where you can get into really knowing higher truths and really kind of going in that upper octave.
It's kind of fascinating. I want to touch on this with you real briefly, which is very often I've talked to people who try to stay in a spiritual state of mind, and they'll say, well, I watched this great documentary. It was all about this spiritual thing I was really into. And then I went out in my everyday life, and there was incredible traffic, and it was a stressful environment, and I lost my whole center, and my whole day unraveled, and all the rest of it. This idea of having a centering practice that you do on a daily basis, it's kind of fundamental in the type of work that you would do.
It's everything. You have to have a routine, and you have to be physical. You have to do mundane things, because that creates a pattern for spirituality to crash against.
Okay.
your spiritual part, if all you do is escape into your spirituality, you're going to be like a hose that's turned on. You're just like, oh, it's not going to make any sense, right? And you're just going to be completely controlled by it. You're going to be cycling through weird moods. You're going to be like, ah. And so you have to do very physical things, clean your house, go for a walk, do very mundane things. And the more mundane things you can do, the more psychic you'll become, because it's those mundane things that actually allow us to get detailed psychic information, and actually understand. It's what takes those really crazy, vast concepts into something that's usable. So we have to remember that we have to do everything on the spectrum. The more physical you are, the more psychic you are, which is a Gurdjieff principle, as you've spoken about as well. So
yeah, right, absolutely. It's interesting. You do mountain hikes and stuff. Like you're
today. I did one today. Oh, I am the girl that's like, time to take my shoes off. And I like take my shoes off. I hug the tree. I do yoga on the rock, and people stare at me. And I'm like, you should be doing this. Don't you stare at me. You should be doing this.
Oh, that's great. It's great.
I gather the mud from underneath the tree, and I like put it on my nose for real.
Yeah, oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, you have to do some videos on that. That's what we want to see.
I will.
Miss Olivia, I'm going to have you insert a question here as I switch to the next card.
So Tikana Lotre wants to know, does Gigi find gardening and working with the earth to be the most grounding of mundane physical activity?
Well, she just put mud on her eyes. So that's the answer is yes.
I really do. Sometimes because I work in this field, I'll get away from it. And I'm like, oh, I'm too tired to do anything physical, and don't get on that train. Because it's like you kind of lose your feel for it. But whenever I do make time for it, I'm so much better psychologically.
Yeah.
And nature has a way of actually neutralizing psychic energy. The earth is always emitting a grounding, neutralizing, and it will take chaos away if you just allow yourself to get lost in it. And it's designed to do that. Like trees take our CO2 and turn it into oxygen. The earth is kind of made to absorb things that we don't need. And so gardening, all that kind of stuff, it's some of the best stuff for depression and anxiety, things like that.
Needing to get away from computer reality also.
The computer reality tends to heighten mind energy. The way that everything is, it tends to heighten anxiety. It tends to make it so you're spinning really fast and you're in these chakras, and it can make you kind of anxious.
Yes. Yeah. And anxiety, you're not going to get any clarity when you're in this anxious state. Actually, it's a great state to be in if you want to be controlled, which is, that's why we see on so many of these kind of political shows is they need to whip you up into a frenzy. And, like, really hate this political figure and, like, see, this is a terrible person. And then person into this whole, like, thought wave, terrible person. And they're feeding that whole thing. You see this over and over again. And there's no way really to get out of it. I mean, in terms of real journalism, reporting on somebody who's doing evil things, that's part of the course for doing journalism. But the kind of, like they had in George Orwell's 2 Minutes Hate, when they have you sit there, it actually increases your state, that kind of like brain trance.
Your nervous system just...
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the kind of thing that we need to really be careful of. And you see a lot of it in the alternative news media, as well as the regular media. They turn on what Catherine Austin Fitts calls the shriekometer. Olivia, what else have you got?
Well, Zeke wants to know if you have the winning Mega Millions numbers for Friday.
I've never tried to do lotto numbers. I don't think that's how it works, though.
It's a damn good answer. We'll take one more.
You can't desperately plead either. I
know. Don't shower Gigi with emails about the lottery, whatever you do.
So Quantum Paradox wanted to know, Gigi, when you're getting psychic information, are you projecting in the astral or do you stay in your body?
Yeah.
It depends on the psychic information. So the astral realm is sort of divided into two. There's the upper astral level of information, and then there's the lower astral. The lower astral, I mean, I'm not looking for anything in there. I'm just not interested in that.
Right.
And the more you do this work, the more you sense what it is. The astral realm the lower astral realm will do things like try to stroke your ego. It'll be like, hey, one day you're going to be so famous, you'll need the biggest fences in the world. It'll do something like that, or it'll get you trapped in it. So as a psychic, you always want to go beyond that membrane into maybe the upper level of that, but you really want to kind of go beyond that. The more you get beyond that astral realm, the more genius the information is. So that's the level of genius and creativity. And that's where, Nikola Tesla was popping into.
Right.
And the people who brought these innovations, they were going beyond that membrane, and they were giving that, they were going into that fresh space. And that's where I try to go as well. Definitely not comparing myself to those people, but that's the goal of, I think, every intuitive is to traverse those levels. And that's where I go as well for deep time and stuff.
Oh, it's fascinating. So if you see Michael Jackson show up in your trance state in a dream and say, you're going to be more famous than me, you're probably in lower astral, is what you're saying.
That's what they do. They want you to, the lower astral is parasitic. So they want you to keep going back to them. They're going to give you big dreams about who you are. And if you're connecting with a higher being, they always bring you back to love. And your individuality, certainly, your life purpose, certainly, but they don't place you above others. They don't create these weird hierarchies. That's definitely a lower astral thing.
Fascinating. One more, Olivia.
Okay, so these are two linked questions. So Crystal ASMR wants to know, do you use any crystals, and do you recommend any? And Adam Riddle wants to know, do you use neodymium magnets while meditating?
That one's for you, DJ.
Oh, wow, the crystals, huh? No. One of the things you did so well was we were talking about the right states to get kind of clarity of mind, and you were like, how are the electronics around you? And I was like, I'm hopeless because I'm surrounded everywhere I turn in the studio, at my house, the whole thing. There's electronics everywhere, so there's very little clarity. Although I have a salt lamp. So.
That salt lamp is working overtime. Yeah. With crystals, I tend to go towards the grounding crystals because my natural position, my natural constitution is not grounded. So I tend to go towards things like obsidian, tiger's eye, hematite, just a darn stone from the ground that I liked, something like that. I also really like just clear quartz. I like selenite. I like all crystals, to be honest with you. Like, I'm not going to ever say no to one. But I do tend to, like, if I'm working, I'll do more of a grounding stone or something.
Isn't that fascinating? Wow. Yeah, I will okay. Actually. Okay. I've worn lapis lazuli before, and there's a series of Casey readings that recommend it. And it's funny because they reference in those readings that there's this huge stone of lapis that's in the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art, and that the stone was known for years for people that it would sing when you were next to it. So it kind of created this whole environment, and people would do this and report on this. So it's quite remarkable. I think we don't understand the stones very well at all.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I add something? So,
yes, please.
So I, based on what I learned, I got some black tourmaline and my life went to hell. So it's not necessary. So what you have to do is really trust your own energetic impression by wearing the crystal.
Well, let's see your necklace. You have a necklace on now. Yeah, let's see it.
This is a Kate King necklace. They're really expensive. I never would have chosen this for myself. It's not my taste. It's not my color.
Look at that.
But it is a powerful tool for me to keep connected to my spirit guides.
Quite remarkable.
I feel that.
Wow.
And so anyway, but I chose it with my eyes closed on my body, feeling the difference in my own aura and my consciousness. So that it changed the way I looked at crystals.
That's amazing. That whole idea of a talisman, and a companion, an energetic companion, and radiating into something your own vibration. And then later, if somebody takes the object and they can feel so much about you. I mean, we're surrounded, with those types of tools. They're available to us. There's an incredible tradition around them as well.
Yeah. And Olivia's right. Always feel it. Always like hold it, and don't ever choose a crystal because someone says that you should choose it. Like always feel that. That's such a great point. Always feel to see what your relationship is, because you have your own harmonic. So.
Oh yeah, yeah, fascinating. I knew someone who almost had something akin to a split personality, and I noticed it was heightened dramatically when they wore amethyst. So it's a very unscientific observation, but I realized, wow, that's interesting. There was these two sides, and the amethyst would bring out this other side. It was very unusual. You're watching Dark Journalist, everyone's fantastic X series Halloween special that we have here with a huge crowd and a great audience. We're going to take your questions in the second half of the program. We're already taking a few. Please ask them all in caps. Olivia can catch them a lot easier that way. And we're going to go deep now into the second level of the Cern cards. And since Gigi mentioned Nikola Tesla, let's look at the King of Wands in the Cern tarot deck. Nikola Tesla. It's a few weird things about this, Gigi, and I want to get into it with you because you made a very crucial observation when we were looking at these. First of all, his inclusion again is like Huxley's inclusion. There's a little bit of like disdain mixed with fluff. That is, instead of showing him as the victorious inventor that he was, of course, he gave us alternating current, which we all use to electrify the entire planet. And many of his ideas, as we know, were stolen by Thomas Edison. It's an open secret. And he certainly, by 1910, with the Wardenclyffe Tower, or even as early as 1903, he already had developed a system for sending out wireless energy. So the same way we do wireless phones now, he had developed it, but he had developed it for JP Morgan, who was trying to get a handle on this, and it wasn't what Morgan had asked for, actually. And so Morgan, looking at this, when they took it to the other financiers, they said, we got to shut this guy down, 1. 2, we got to shut down that tower, and 3, let's make sure nobody ever hears about this, and let's get this guy's inventions like parked away, because if they figure this out, the oil paradigm is gone and all the rest of it, and it's determining a kind of social ecology. This is how they were going to do it. Now, what's fascinating to me is that his inclusion here is quite interesting, first of all. But one of the things that Gigi noticed is it's kind of an unflattering card, especially where they have the bottom of it and they have this kind of circular thing, and it says Tesla's attempt to broadcast free electricity throughout the world. And it's in this kind of pond, in a pit, basically. And there are unusual things here. They talk about his invention of radio, which, as we know, Marconi didn't invent it, actually, as a Supreme Court case approved in 1914. It was Tesla that invented it, but he couldn't get the credit for it. Again, Tesla's luck not being connected with that. But what I found interesting, Gigi, is this crown here. Of course, we have the King of Wands as the card, but the crown is above the Wardenclyffe Tower, and some of that somewhat dour presentation of Tesla. How did that strike you?
Yeah, they're acknowledging, like they're crediting him for his inventions and his ingenuity, but they're kind of also passively referencing that he's a failure at the same time.
Right.
Underneath the Wardenclyffe Tower, it says foreclosed.
Right.
I mean, there's no need to really necessarily say foreclosed. It's sort of a humiliating thing to have. I mean, how would you like to be on a tarot card after you die and say your workshop was foreclosed?
Yes.
How does that feel to you?
Yes.
It again, it's like Huxley. It's these humanitarian undertones to these people's personalities that are shamed, or that are, kind of, laughed at, or, looked down upon.
It's a fascinating observation. On the card, it says Tesla sought explanation of cosmic processes to theoretically connect the material and the spiritual. but again, suggesting that he never made it, basically. And if you really look at this card compared to the others, it's kind of like, it could almost be like the Joker in a way, you know? It's sort of like there's something kind of zany about it going on. It's like, hey, look, you try to connect to the stars and the sun and give us wireless energy. Ha ha.
Yeah.
I thought that was an excellent observation on your part. And there are strange references in the kind of dirt here, which is like robotics is one, remote control, computer science, radar, giving him the credit, but really down there in the mud.
You can barely see it. You can barely even read the credit that they're giving him. It's kind of a failure card in a way. It doesn't say Timothy Leary's failures on his card.
Right.
You know, and these other people.
Yeah. How many bad trips did Timothy Leary have? Let's think about it. One thing I want to point out is if there's a traditional tarot reader out there in our lineup tonight, tell us what the King of Wands is predominantly known for. I would like to hear that and draw you guys in to kind of give us an overview from a traditional standpoint, because there's no question that we've locked into their strange presentation of the cards and their explanations for them, and we're giving our interpretations around that. And if somebody comes out there in the audience and wants to say, well, the King of Wands traditionally is, that'll give us a nice little contrast. We'll throw that out to you guys. Okay, the next one, Gigi, the Tower.
Oh yes, the Tower, the hypnotic Tower. Yeah, this one was
wow. Let's take a look at it.
It's a pyramid. Oh no. Oh, is it? Oh, I'm looking at the devil. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, the devil's coming. No, the Tower Total Information Awareness Program is something that they place at the bottom, which I think is really fascinating. Again, I want to stress that there's an incredible education that goes along with these cards. So, like, they have disdain, you know, for people like Huxley and Tesla who try to move against the elite. That's my straight up impression of them. But nonetheless, their incredible information is something that we need to absorb to help us see through them to the things that they're looking at and that they're dealing with, and even the fears, the cynicism, the desires that they have. We get kind of a piece of that in here. So let's take a look at this card. That is the Tower card, and we've got some crazy things in there like DARPA. There are these explosions going on. The CIA is in there. This is a remarkable manifestation. Let's look at some of the various categories that we have. So the thing that's exploding back there is banking, email, airline, financial, phone, cell phone, internet spending. That's our modern 21st century setup. There's no question about it. And they're showing it as this big explosion. And on one side, we've got DARPA, and then we've got Army Intel over here. And one of the plaques here at the base of this big banking, email, financial setup is Fort George and Fort Meade in Maryland, Virginia, where they do a lot of training for things like assassins. But it's an interesting spotlight. They have on one side data mining, and then they get into this total information awareness program. What kind of impressions were you getting from this? The Tower traditionally, this much we know in tarot, is about sudden changes. You said it was the Tower of Babel.
Yeah. It's It's destruction and sudden change. And this is about spying and collecting people's information. And I mean, in a sense, this is the downfall of society. This is the sign that things are going wrong when a government collects all of your information and hoards it away for an opportune time. So I completely understand that. It's strange because it's almost like they're aware of that. The psychology behind it's really interesting because they're aware that this is wrong, yet there's nothing that can be done. There's a very kind of cynical undertone to have that there.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing you pointed out, and I'll point it out to everyone, actually, I'll do this again, a little closer, are all these little eyeballs everywhere.
There's little blue eyes watching everybody.
It's a little bit interesting. I mean, blue eyes, Gigi?
Well, they're not other colors.
Absolutely. They are certainly blue. I agree with you. And at the bottom, we've got two large blue eyes, but the blue is actually in where the white of the eye usually is.
Yeah.
Symbolic references, colors. This was one of the more disturbing cards, I think, that when I remember going through this with you, we went over this one, and it represents this kind of massive overindulgence, over surveillance, slamming things together, National Security Agency, DARPA, which we know does some of the darkest developments for military purposes. So definitely getting a message on that one, that they were trying to send the signal of like nihilism.
Yeah.
That's the way I read that one.
It's very bleak.
Extremely bleak. Absolutely. Gigi, the X card in the deck is the Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah.
Oh,
great. Yeah.
You know how much we value the X Steganography on this show. What was this card? How are you reading this card? Let's take a look.
The Wheel of Fortune is supposed to be karma, and
yeah, we'll take a quick look here just so everyone has it. It's Cybernetics, Transhumanism, Wheel of Fortune there. And so what kind of impressions were you getting?
God, well, I mean, for the first thing that comes forward is, God, they're doing cybernetics again.
Yeah.
Like, again, you're writing cybernetics again. You're dedicating a whole card on the major arcana to cybernetics. It's just a complete obsession with these people.
Absolutely.
It's not even a wheel. It's some kind of like,
right.
It's not even a wheel. They've done something else.
Well, what I think is interesting is they came up with something in here where they referenced the Macy Conferences. Now, the Macy Conferences are a series of advanced scientific conferences that started technically in 1946, but I'm going to give you a real interesting heads up that they began in earnest in 1942, and the first subject that they studied was hypnosis. Now, this is pretty interesting with them coming up with this kind of cybernetics description, the high-tech stuff. And they would meet up, and eventually, see if I have a picture of it. This is something that they did. I'd like to surprise everyone with this. Olivia, while I'm finding it, why don't you toss out a question here?
Okay, so, well, Bo Krill has had another question. Gigi, I recently had this impulse to stare into the sun, eyes open and absorb, basking. It feels positive. Good, bad? What do you think?
Sun gazing is a way that a lot of people have gained spiritual sustenance and prana chi, life force ki. But I would highly recommend doing it when the sun is just starting to rise or just in the setting phase. Don't ever look at the sun directly. That will burn your retinas. Definitely do it when it's in its transitional phase, in a twilight.
Yeah, unhealthy practice there to look at it straight on for sure. That's why all the sunglasses, of course. But it is interesting, though, because I've heard this too, and there's a whole kind of group that's dedicated to doing this. And I saw something on it in South America where they were down there, and they were expatriates down there, and they were going around and staring at the sun. That's what they did. And a lot of them were like, I don't need to eat now, and it got quite remarkable because I guess it alters your thinking patterns also.
But yeah, the idea is that human evolution is that we leave eating for liquids, then breatharianism, and then just live off of the sun. That is the idea. I think that some people try to experiment with that and see where they are in relationship to that. But that's certainly the goal.
Well, in breatharians, this is always the thing that comes up. Just don't try this at home, kids, whatever you do. No, it is a noble idea, and the idea that we can get by with a lot less, I think, is a very worthwhile thing to look at. When brought to extremes, of course, we get rough situations. I remember, there was someone running these lodges, like sweat lodges, which is a Native American custom for getting rid of impurities, and it can apply physically, mentally, spiritually. It's such a fantastic thing to do. But somebody had turned it into a full-time profession, basically, and he was launching these things. And he's in Colorado and Arizona. For some reason, Colorado and Arizona always get a bloody nose when it comes to cults. And he had people in the sweat lodges who died because of the conditions of it. And this is what happens when this marketing forces take over a practice, which comes out of a sacred tradition and needs to be kind of cared for, taught properly, and guarded in a sense.
Yeah, I think he put tarps on there, and obviously you'd never put a tarp on a sweat lodge. It's what happens when, it's what happens when the ego gets involved. So if you think that the reason why you're altering your diet in a certain way is, if it's in any way connected with ego, then that's going to be really dangerous for you and other people. That's not what it's for.
Fascinating. I found my picture of what they were doing there at the Macy Conference. It's something called Cyber Seance. Are you ready? Gigi, what does that remind you of?
That's that card.
It is indeed. Wait till we get to this card. Whoa.
Yeah, that's that card. I forget what one it is, but that's the picture.
Absolutely. And we're going to get to that one. What did my mind instantly went to what these Macy conferences were about. The Orphic circle that Emma Britton had told us she had been recruited into as a young girl. Same circle, palms down, receiving the same information. And what's funny is they were doing this, trying to contact these kind of famous figures from the 19th century. And but here we have a direct mystery school tie over in this incredibly technological environment of cybernetics, early cybernetics. And now CERN is celebrating it. So we start to understand the foundations that they're placing here. This is directly out of her work, Suzanne's work. So now we're seeing them celebrate spiritualism of a kind. Did that strike you as odd?
I think that if you were looking at it and you didn't know about the Orphic circle and you didn't know about spiritualism and how information is obtained, I think it would be weird. But we can clearly see with the nuclear program and even other government programs that a lot of the information goes along with what psychics from Theosophy were actually channeling. And so what happens is that in these circles is that the psychics will be used to channel information that's usable in science. And what ends up happening is they get way farther along than they could by themselves.
Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah.
It's fascinating. They're getting tapping into this incredible information, getting these incredible downloads, and then boom, they have this major impact on society. Now, what's fascinating is Ada Lovelace, who we did an episode on in September, who was Byron's daughter, and who's the first person who created the first computer algorithm, but all the way back in the 1840s. This is a shot of Ada here, and she's a remarkable person who was deep into mesmerism and lectured on it. So she's no stranger to mesmerism, and that fascination likely came through the Orphic circle. But what I found interesting and what I'm trying to follow up on more is her close friend is Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein at 18. And I'm putting together myself, I don't have the actual paper trail yet with Mary Shelley, but because she's close friends with Ada, who's in the Orphic circle, I'm thinking 18 years old writing Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's in the Orphic circle because she's close to Byron.
That would make sense. Witches together.
And so Frankenstein gives us this creation, basically. It's resurrection, it's creating life, but the thing is out of control. I mean, there's a lot of themes in Frankenstein when you think of the Orphic circle, just like there are themes. We know that our friend Lewis Carroll there, who developed this incredible story of Alice in Wonderland, that living model of Alice in Wonderland from the Orphic Circle was Emma Britton, who all these incredible things would happen to, and she could describe those experiences. So we're getting kind of deep now. We're getting deep into the Orphic Circle, overlapping into computers all the way back to 1840. Let's take it a step further. The death card, John von Neumann. Okay, let's take a quick look at this one. The death card is particularly interesting to me and should be for viewers of the X series because von Neumann is the person who took over the UFO file from Arthur Compton. And if you watched my show in the summer on Compton and Vannevar Bush, and Vannevar Bush's protege, John Trump, who was President Trump's uncle, we start to get a handle on how these figures are advanced in the first place, and how they're not just technologically advanced, but they are now getting this background of information from groups like the Orphic Circle. And I'm going to try here to tie Neumann directly into this, just to give us an idea. One of the things about Neumann, the first question, how do we know Neumann took over the UFO file? Which is an incredible responsibility. Like, you give it to the top man, Vannevar Bush, Compton. You know, these are Nobel Prize winning physicists. Those are the ones that get in charge of it. Well, we had another Nobel Prize winning physicist, Robert Sar Barker, who was the toast of the town in physics. And Sar Barker worked side by side with, you know, all of the major guys. Now, in 1950, in Saturday Evening Post and the New York Times articles, he's heralded as the top physicist, right up there with Oppenheimer, who we hear about day in, day out. Well, when I was originally doing research on Sar Barker, I found that he wasn't really cited that much in historical scientific journals, which struck me as weird. That was one. Two, he did not have a Wikipedia page, which is incredible. And actually, the Wikipedia page said the person doesn't exist. So that struck me as odd, because, as I always point out, Olivia pointed out to me that the dwarf from the Wizard of Oz, like, he has his own, you know, one of the main dwarves from the Wizard of Oz has his own Wikipedia page. How can you leave out the top physicist that America had? Well, there was an interesting little conversation that he had with someone named Bill Steinman, who had written a book about a UFO crash in New Mexico in 1952, and he wanted to get information about it because he figured this guy was part of the team that Vannevar Bush had worked on. And what happened inevitably was this exchange of letters, which was amazing, which he then confirmed on the phone with another researcher, that Sar Barker in the 1980s, when he was retired, said, oh yeah, I headed up the UFO redevelopment program and the examination of the UFO file. And I'm shocked that they keep that stuff so secret. I don't know why. And he described incredible things like, well, the beings that operate them are very much like insects, actually. And we figured that much out because the acceleration and deceleration, they had to be able to handle that. So they had to be incredibly lightweight. And he went into all these incredible details about it. I wish they had gotten more information out of him, actually. But there's no question. He said in black and white that the person who took over initially from Vannevar Bush, who had it, who was actually the head of it, the person who took over was Arthur Compton. And that when Compton dropped it, von Neumann had it for 9 years. That's a long time. So von Neumann is listed here on the Cern Tarot deck as death. It's a little bit odd. It's a mutation. How does this card strike you?
This is somebody that they would consider brought in a new era.
Mm-hmm.
This is someone. This is the Grim Reaper. This is the guy that's riding the horse as a skeleton. That's what they're saying. So I think that this individual, to them, they would consider him as creating great change, changing the direction of the program that he was in, and even deeper programs. And that's what I would say. Fascinating.
Absolutely fascinating. They show here in the center. First of all, there's weird X Steganography above his head.
Yeah.
I want to point that out. It's just so obvious. There. Which it's not necessary for the design at all. It doesn't mean anything. Macy Conferences. core group member. That's in the middle of the card.
They really wanted people to notice that.
They've got the ability, because he was part of the Manhattan Project, to say, well, that's why we included him as the death card. My own impression, Gigi, is that he's the death card because he managed the UFO file. What do you think of that?
I agree. I think you could look at it as the Manhattan Project as being that, but I think it's deeper. I think it's the individual. I don't think it's about the projects that he worked for. I think it's him. It's his impact.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, it's what he brought to the table. It's what he did, and a lot of this is probably behind the scenes. You know, how he took the UFO file when he inherited it, and what he did with that information, how he managed it, what he created in his time, and so.
Well, it's interesting because there's a little aside in the bottom that says President of von Neumann Committee for Missiles. I guess we're starting to get some idea maybe of what he did with it there. Very interesting. Wow.
And I think like during that time as well, I think that the UFO file was changing. I think these programs went from something that was, I think, curious as to like kind of, and competitive as to like kind of what can we create, what can we do, what's out there. And by the time he inherits it, there's a lot of information and a lot of power. And it starts to be like, now what do we do with this information? Now we have all of this. Now what are we going to do with it?
Right.
What ethical decisions are we going to make about it? Because having the UFO file during his time compared to someone else's time, when it's more of almost like a renaissance or something going on, or more curious, more competitive maybe with other countries, like it's a little bit different of a time.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting that you said, what did he do with it? Because von Neumann is known as the father of modern computing. So the kind of internet version, the processor version, he's quantum mechanics man. He's the man who kind of is at the center of the computer revolution. So that's where he came out of. He also, there's a few interesting things about his background. He's from Hungary, so he's not an American citizen, and he was part of the Rad Lab, which I've always said the Rad Lab basically they moved the best of the scientists into the Rad Lab, ostensibly to develop the Manhattan Project, but the Vannevar Bush, being in charge of the Rad Lab, created the MJ-12 work around it, which that gives us the whole UFO file secrecy at such a high level. According to Sar Barker, 2 levels above the Manhattan Project atomic test. Think about that. You know, I mean, at the time, atomic energy could blow up the world, but they're putting the UFO file 2 notches above the secrecy of the atomic bomb. I mean, it's quite remarkable when you think of it this way. Let's look at von Neumann through the lens, since he is a core group member of the Macy Conferences. Let's, you know, I gave us some idea that the first Macy Conferences were actually about hypnosis and later became about cybernetics. Let's read the official explanation of what these conferences were. By the way, Margaret Mead makes a regular appearance, it seems like, in all of the meetings. So that's really quite remarkable, given her own history, you know, and all the things that we know about Margaret Mead in terms of her work in eugenics. And by the way, Hillary Clinton cites her in her biography as a major inspiration, you know, in her life. So it's kind of unusual, let's face it. Okay, the Macy Conferences, here we go. The Macy Conferences were a set of meetings of scholars from various disciplines held in New York under the direction of Frank Fremont Smith at the Macy Foundation, starting in 1941 and ending in 1960. Also quite interesting. The explicit aim of the conferences was to promote meaningful communication among scientific disciplines and restore unity to science. There were different sets of conferences designed to cover specific topics. For a total of 160 conferences through 20 years, this program was active. The phrase Macy Conferences does not apply only to cybernetics, although it is sometimes used that way informally by those familiar only with that set of events. Disciplinary isolation within medicine was viewed as particularly problematic by the Macy Foundation, given that their mandate was to aid medical research, they decided to do something about it. Other topics covered in different sets of conferences included aging, adrenal cortex, biological antioxidants, blood clotting, connective tissues, infancy and childhood, metabolic interrelations, nerve impulses, problems of consciousness. It's a pretty interesting group.
Very creepy group.
Problems
I think that's a very nice word.
of
They're looking into. They want to build robots, human robots. That's what they're doing. You know.
You understand the spiritual edge very well. I mean, this whole idea, the chakra system, how we operate spiritually through a physical body, through a mental body. When we get people like out of the Macy Conferences, or for example, Elon Musk said, I'm building something now where I want to upload my consciousness into it. It shows a great deal of spiritual ignorance to think that you can do that, doesn't it?
A shocking level of it. I mean, it's impossible. I mean, you can't do that. I mean, it's not even compatible. You know, our consciousness is not electricity. It's so beyond that. It's even more subtle than that. And it's very scary that people think that, you know, that can even be done. That's, you know, we've arrived to have like a Wikipedia memory. It's like, you know, it's a very, very divorced psyche that would be thinking that was a good goal. You can't put the soul on a computer.
Is that level of ignorance from a spiritual perspective disturbing to you, who understands both worlds, I think, pretty well?
Yeah, it is disturbing, because you're just going to kind of get stuck in like this weird feedback loop. And what will happen is you're just going to atrophy as a human. We're designed as multidimensional beings. We're designed to ground very deeply into the earth and then start channeling increasingly higher levels of information so that it transforms our whole system. And so if you don't realize that very basic reality, then you're basically just going to turn into something that's inhuman. You're just completely denying your humanity. You're not going to be creative, or, you know, it's all gone.
Well, the transhumanists, which definitely is deeply, deeply associated with these cards, with CERN, with the Macy Conferences, it's like a transhumanist sandwich coming at you. And the way that I look at it is this, you know, when we have people out there like Kurzweil and all these people saying the singularity is near, I'm going to merge with machines, and, you know, we're going to reach this next level. It's fascinating because in the Tree of Life, in some of those early Hermetic setups, what you need to do to go up the Tree of Life is raise your spirituality and raise your consciousness. And you go, the level you go from is animal to mineral, and then so on up the train. And I think that they've devised, in looking at this from a kind of a cosmological, esoteric point of view, that since the metals involved in robotics are mineral, that they can escape their animal quality, which they consider themselves human animals, and they're going to merge into mineral robots. So this is how they're going to go up the tree, but without any of the spiritual advancement. You know, this is like climbing up the tree some other way, and they're thinking, well, you know, I can't go through the traditional route of spiritual development, you know, because of my moral, ethical character. But what I can do is devise a system where I can merge up that Tree of Life by projecting my consciousness into mineral. This is where, and this isn't talked about enough, but this is where the transhumanists are coming from the esoteric side, which is they're moving into the mineral.
That's a great point. It's like complete, and that's what happens, boys and girls, when you do a ton of LSD and you do a bunch of synthetic drugs all the time. I think you start tapping into even, this is getting a little bit out there, but you start tapping into beings and creatures that are in lower realms that tell you this, so that they can harvest your energy and they can become sort of the parasitic thing. So if you've never genuinely connected with your heart or your spirit, then you can be convinced that your heart and spirit is something else. And that's why I always say, if you want to, experiment with like, mushrooms or something, or you do want to do that, okay, but get to know the feeling of your own heart and soul first. Don't start thinking that it's something else or somewhere else, because that's where this is going.
Absolutely. And I state this a lot, which is that the psychic experience of somebody in, say, the Orphic circle or the mystery schools can never be compared with somebody who is reaching something through, say, like ayahuasca or something, because it changes all the conditions of your mental capacity to take information in. I'm not discounting the value of psychedelics under certain types of traditions at all, but I'm saying that when you want to talk about things that we talk about on this program in relation to states of consciousness or the mystery schools and the consciousness that they have, it has nothing to do with psychedelics. It has nothing to do with taking drugs to get there. The reason it's a mystery school is you learn that you are the vehicle that is able to do that. And so therefore you don't have a substance do it for you.
100%. And this is even referenced in shamanic culture, where a lot of shamans will admit, like, when you become a master shaman, you just use the drum.
Mm-hmm.
And these are in like peyote cultures and
Wow.
ayahuasca cultures. They're just like, no, we just use the drum. You just use rhythm. And a lot of these even natural substances are there to give you a reference point, to reference how something feels, so you can get out of your own ideas. But then you should just be able to use, hopefully, maybe your breath, pranayama, and a drum. And that's the sign of a real master, is being able to do that, access them from your own energy, your own self.
Gigi, you're a great one for talking about our internal technology, that we have this thing to tap into ourselves. Does this dependence, this growing dependence on the outside technology, diminish and atrophy that ability?
I think that it does. I think it distracts us. And I think it devalues it. It's certainly less exciting to sit, for some people, if your brain is wired to these fast moving video games and YouTube videos, it's not as exciting to go sit in your backyard and meditate. Certainly.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. And
keep going. It's a great point. Actually, go for it.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. It trains you away from who you truly are. But when you find it again, you really notice the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Olivia, I'm going to take questions from you in a minute here. I'm going to ask now. Actually, I want to ask you this, Gigi, since we did this fantastic episode, and I'm still getting people raving about this Rata episode that we did a few weeks ago. And it is quite a remarkable Casey Steiner weekend that we had doing those episodes. But one thing that came up was about the Two-Eye Stone, which is something that Casey references this lost civilization had, which was this incredibly advanced crystal that ran a power station and then eventually caused massive destruction. We've talked about it. You've done incredible tuning in to that in a retrocognitive fashion that I have not seen someone able to do in real time the way that you've done it. I've read about it, we've seen people in the past have done it. We've read their accounts, but I think that it's a remarkable thing that you can do going into these past eras. So on the Two-Eye Stone, you tapped into an enormous vein of information that was remarkable. One of the things I wanted to ask you, though, was, do you think with CERN, the Hadron Collider specifically, and the Alice Collider, which are quite unique? I mean, there are other particle colliders. There's one here in Long Island, on the East Coast. But CERN, its budget, the Hadron Collider, and everything that they're doing, are we looking at a modern day Two-Eye Stone, which is a volatile situation?
I think that we are. I think that our CERN technology is like the Two-Eye Stone of this era. Atlantis fell into a more dense state. So it's
Right.
going to have a different technology that comes about. And when we look at Atlantis and we look at certain energies that were going on there, I think it was a lot more feminine in some ways, the time. And so it makes sense that the it'd be a crystal or something a bit more organic. And then we come down into here and we get a lot more dense. Then we get something more dense as well, like a machine. We get this weird kind of humming, whirring, aggressive, smashing,
Yes.
machine.
Particles. Yeah.
Smashing particles. And it is, we are at a time. And I think that there was a graph. I think you had a graph that showed like the timing is correct as well. If you were to, parallel the societies, we're reaching a point where this is where that kind of thing comes about, a destructive technology, and where people have to start waking up.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. It's kind of like, I think CERN has skated in a way because the theories about it, because we get so little information about it that people make up all these theories. Well, these demons are coming through CERN, and the Legion, the hosts of the devil, are coming through CERN, and so there's a lot of runaway talk about it. Oddly enough, CERN themselves promote the idea that they're looking for other dimensions through the work as well. So it should lend itself to some talk like that because, well, if you're looking for other dimensions, are there other beings in those dimensions? And you run away. But I think it is worthwhile nonetheless, because it is such a hidden process, to really take a look at the psychic processes that are in operation around CERN. And we've already talked that there's so much unusual supernatural activity around it. And the fact that they are kind of hidden away, very non-transparent. The scientists who went to sue them in relation to these strangelets that they felt was a possibility of being a side effect of something that would happen at CERN, and would basically create a lot of little black holes that would, create this matter around vegetation and things. They were really concerned about this. And these were not fly-by-night conspiracy theorists. I mean, they were hardcore scientists who objected to the project. And they went to sue them. The case went forward in Hawaii, and the judge looked at it from every angle. And he did this thing, which I find over and over again when we come up against the deep state or breakaway civilization, even the secret space program. There's this corridor that people cannot get a hand on. And I find it with the continuity of government projects also. But what the judge said to them is like, look, CERN is autonomous. It's like you're trying to sue Austria or you're trying to sue Hungary or something. It's an actual autonomous thing. So it makes it incredibly hard to sue it because it's not a corporation and it's not an entity. It's not a government entity. It's its own sovereign, weird project that has this incredible $8 billion budget. So it is, getting more into what it is, and those scientists being concerned about strangelets and what could happen there, although, they didn't think that the odds were dramatically great that these things could happen, but that it needed to be looked at. And CERN kind of gets a weird free ride because it's so celebrated in the scientific community on a godlike level, just like with the D-Wave chip. They have this kind of godlike, there's a picture of, I think Elena Freeland pointed this out, which is these guys come out and they're holding the D-Wave chip, and they come out and it's like high priests or something, coming out with the Urim and Thummim from the Kabbalah or so. I mean, it's quite interesting what's going on in scientific circles. And I think the more that we penetrate into the psychic end around CERN, we start to get a handle on what's really happening here with the culture. Because if it is the two-eyes stone, if it's the return of all that, then it certainly has incredibly destructive potential. And we hear about China and India now, and they're looking at it with its military budget. They said, we're going to develop our own.
That's not necessary. China, you're watching.
I want to send Gigi as an ambassador on this. Just don't do it. It's not necessary, damn it.
I've arrived. I'm like wearing this. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm so glad that you brought those facts up, because when people start hearing about Higgs boson and particle acceleration and the ionosphere is warping, their eyes gloss over. We're not educated to process that type of language. We don't, you know, so I think a lot of people just kind of gloss over when they hear about these kind of things because they don't understand it, because there's such a gap right now in, I think, just being able to talk about physics and things like that. So I think that they're really hiding in a dark fold, and they've locked themselves away in this dark fold right now. And I hope that more conversation can be had so we shine a light on it.
Well, you and I will certainly be doing more shows on the actual tarot deck and more on CERN. Before we leave the topic and take questions, which Olivia is ready with.
I'm getting ready.
I want to remind everyone that you're watching Dark Journalists, and go to darkjournalist.com. Sign up for our newsletter. It's the best way for us to stay in touch. You know, with the social media crackdown, it's become quite ridiculous. And, you know, every day you see like Twitter, they're like, you know, we're going to take away the ability for people to like a tweet now because too many, you know, positions, public policy positions that they disagree with, people are voting up, you know. So it's this complete fascist system there. God knows how long it'll last, but we'll be on there for the ride as long as it does. In the meantime, sign up for the newsletter, so that gives us that direct pipeline with each other. And then whatever we're doing, events, videos, anything that we happen to be up to, you're going to know about. It'll be in your inbox. And of course, with Gigi, her course is at gigiyoung.com, and her videos on YouTube, one of the greatest libraries of information, I would say. Just type in Gigi Young on YouTube and you'll get incredible information. And what I like at Gigi, what you do, you're very succinct also. You're very focused when you go after a subject, which is terrific because I talk hours and hours and hours, as everyone knows.
No, I do too. Don't worry.
So let's say this as a final word on the deck for now, because we're going to go back into it. What were your impressions after spending time with those cards? How did you feel about the people and their perspectives putting them together?
You know what? I have to be completely honest. I had a really strong impression that the people that are involved in this, this is just me, but it's kind of like they were on a merry-go-round that they want to get off.
Interesting.
That was my impression, like that, like it's just gone too far and they kind of wanted to get off it. I think that a lot of the people who are involved in a legacy level. And I think that there's a little bit of sabotage. I think that, you know, there's so much information in here. It's almost like asking to say, stop me.
Well, that's an interesting point. It's almost like a cry for help, like get us out of this mess.
I look at these things and you look at some of the most hopeful cards in the deck, like the sun or these, you know, these bright things. And it's like a person hunched over with electrodes and, you know, and you're just sort of like, this is a sad, this is a very sad, people who created this deck had a very bleak outlook about humanity, about themselves. They believe that transhumanism and cybernetics is the way. They believe this. They believe this. And these are the people that have a machine that crunches around the ionosphere, and they have their own little island. This is a very dangerous belief. These cards are terrifying. We need to be looking at these cards and asking questions. We need to look at every single card and ask questions. The fact that these are out there and these people have so much power, $8 billion, and they have this bleak of an outlook is concerning. So, yeah.
Absolutely. That's interesting too, with the way that you've tuned into it and tuned into their own attitudes about it. There's a kind of a nihilism associated with it, a cynicism mixed with a nihilism, mixed with a religious fervor about cybernetics. I agree with you.
Fervor is really good. They're definitely, and the Unabomber references. I remember earlier.
I didn't get to that. My God, we're gonna have to do like 3 shows on these cards.
We didn't even get to that, but the people that they're referencing, and it's just very, very low, dull, metallic, and you know, I'd love to hear also what other people have to say, you know, for our next show, what they got out of them as well, because there's just so much. These cards are so detailed.
No question. And the Unabomber references come up twice. So, Ted Kaczynski is basically like a strange anarchist hero in there. Quite remarkable. I thought about that also.
I agree.
In the cards that he was associated with. I want to show this card before we let go. It's got this eagle kind of dominating the world, and it's the United States Cyber Command. It's the Eight of Swords is the card. Let's take a look at this. And we'll end the tarot section on this card. It's quite interesting. And I'm going to point something out here since we are always on the trail of the X Steganography, which is deep, deep in these cards. And I didn't stress it so much because there's so much going on. But I want to point this out as part of the Cyber Command logo here. This is very easy to discern. The X is here. The lightning bolt is Apotheum, and that's the key. So remember what we say in the X series, which is the X is the technology that they track through the secret program. The Apotheum is the effect here that it's hard to control, came out of the UFO file. They've studied it. That's the thing that causes the most amount of secrecy. That's the lightning bolt there for the Apotheum. And then the key is underneath it, which is somehow that X with the Apotheum effect is the key to why there's a cyber command structure. I think that Nihilism over and over again coming up around the X, especially with these keys, shows us their great knowledge of mystery school steganography.
Yeah, the lightning bolt kind of reminds me of the Nazis.
Yes, the SS, absolutely.
It kind of reminds you guys of the rune symbol and the SS.
Yes, absolutely. Wow, it does. I didn't even think of that. That's perfect.
It's like a little bit tilted, but it does sort of look that way. And we do know that the Nazis had some pretty apothic or Apotheum.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
That's going on. So.
Well, you and I had an interesting conversation about the Nazi bell, and we started to talk about the things that are missing from these cards that are strangely missing. I mean, the Nazi bell is a major development in physics because it gets to torsion physics. And we only found out about it because when Germany had reunification, all these court documents came out about these 50 scientists that were killed when the Nazis thought they were losing the war, and they killed those scientists who were working on Die Glocke, the Bell Project, which was about torsion physics and this unusual bell shape. And, we went back and forth talking about how the Kecksburg incident looks so much like that Nazi bell, and it had those strange hieroglyphs on it. So that combination of factors, and the fact that when they get through all of these cards, they'll mention people like the Unabomber and stuff, but no reference to the Nazi bell or torsion physics. It's interesting what they leave out.
Yeah, I think that what they're leaving out, like it's interesting. They are protecting certain pieces of information that they don't want people to look at historically and things like that. The Nazi bell is one, and I kept getting one of the first times I tuned into Cern, I kept getting "For whom the bell tolls" over and over again.
That's okay, and you were getting it as a phrase when you were tuning in.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, that must be a nothing one, because sometimes as a psychic, you get nothing pieces that you don't know what to do with. And then as soon as I picked up the cards, I got it again, and then I heard it again and again and again, and then it turned into Hemingway, and then found out that there was a major scientist named Hemingway, and that they do use certain people almost as in a ritualistic sense, certain bloodlines, certain people in a ritualistic sense.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Because of course, Ernest Hemingway, he wrote For Whom the Bell Tolls. The scientist that you mentioned was in Canada. We're doing more research on him. It's very interesting, and I'm going to try to find out if he is related. But one thing we found out through this when we were talking is I watched first of all, I'm aware from the Casey readings that Ernest Hemingway's mother was concerned about Hemingway and his drinking and stuff, and she went to Edgar Casey to get a reading on her son. And there's a fantastic record in the readings of this incredible overview that he gives on Ernest Hemingway and his reincarnation in Egypt and all these fascinating lives that he had. Oddly enough, I was watching this documentary from the 1970s about Ponce de Leon and the Fountain of Youth. And in the middle of it was Ernest Hemingway's brother, who looked remarkably like Ernest Hemingway. And he lived on Bimini, which is where Edgar Cayce said the last piece of Atlantis was, oddly enough. And he was leading people to this strange water well, this little pond. And people would go in there and make incredible claims that their arthritis was cured, or, all these different conditions were. And they actually filmed him going in there. But just, very strange, his presence there in Bimini, you getting this For Whom the Bell Tolls, and then Cayce saying Atlantis is in Bimini. I mean, it was quite a remarkable little twist of events.
Yeah, it's definitely leading somewhere. I don't know where, but something with Hemingway, even if they're not related, it's still odd. The scientist is still significant, but yeah, it's a little weird.
We hypothetically looked at it and said, well, Hemingway is, when you think about who was in the Orphic Circle originally, Charles Dickens, Bulwer Lytton, major literary figures. So if they carry that tradition in and it becomes part of the Macy Conferences, for example, then who were the figures of the day? Who were the literary giants of the day? Well, you'd go right to Hemingway and people along that line. And I don't have any hard data that Hemingway was part of a later Orphic Circle, but you can see where we could come to that conclusion. So I found that reference very interesting. We're definitely going to get into that some more. Miss Olivia.
Okay, I'm going to have Phase Templar started off. To my perception, CERN is being used to alter the new energies coming from space onto the planet into negative, low vibrational energy for many reasons.
Nice.
What do you think?
Seems like a good observation. The way that I look at it, I don't think that we have to guess too much about what CERN is up to. We know some basic facts on the ground, that when it's turned on, it alters the magnetosphere and draws on the sun. That's an environmental issue. That's one. We know on the ground about the scientific issue of them being taken to court in Hawaii by other scientists concerned about the environmental impact. That's fact 2. Fact 3 is on security videotape, there was a mock human sacrifice ritual held at CERN. That's odd. And now, we're revealing connections around CERN, which get us, even through this tarot deck by their artist in residence, gives us a bigger idea. There's nothing, I'm not saying there's anything sinister about the artist. She's obviously incredibly talented, and the brain trust behind the cards has an incredible bank of knowledge, for sure. However, the very presence of the Hadron Collider, what it's supposed to be for, it just doesn't add up. $8 billion budget, changing environmental conditions. From every indication, CERN has a military budget. That's what you do with the military budget, $8 billion, $10 billion a year. Not a scientific project. Show me another one like theirs of particle colliders that has that kind of budget. So we're looking at an incredibly powerful, hard to sue, environmentally challenging, scientifically advanced project that we in the public can't get any real good data on. So in that sense, I think, I will speculate all day about what they're up to on the mystical side in there. And we do some of that. But I think if you think in those fundamental journalistic forms of why we would have a curiosity about it, it's amazing that CERN isn't reported on more, in my opinion. So yeah, great question though. Thank you. Okay, keep rolling.
Okay, David Tormina says, DJ, they have announced that CERN has become an earthquake hazard. Okay,
now that's interesting. We've heard that, and it's interesting, of course, we have fracking, right, throughout America now, that it's an earthquake hazard. Over and over again, these things that are going on, and major projects, scientific projects, corporate projects, and we're getting earthquakes out of it. That can't end well. I mean, and that's a very much a Atlantean style thing. It's interesting, Gigi, we talked about the Two-Eye Stone as the new CERN. A major technological disaster, through something like the Hadron Collider. I mean, this would be like a modern day Atlantean style event.
It absolutely would be. I think they're playing with things that they don't understand. And because the reason why I don't think we understand it is because we don't understand ourselves. And the moment that you get into spirit matter technology, then you start getting into how consciousness affects matter. And that's why I think it's such a slippery little slope we're dealing with. Yeah.
I agree. Well, I think what comes up around CERN over and over again is it's like an unsettling thing to know that this is out there, and that we don't have a whole lot of transparency on it, and that it is a kind of a mystery. I have to point out this card because it's not one that we got to. It's the Knave of Swords. And Olivia, Knave in this case would be like a Knight of Swords. Is that what we're talking about?
I
Or
think
Page?
yeah, I think Page.
Page of Swords,
Mhm.
okay. So again, if somebody's out there who's an incredible tarot reader, you can give us the traditional interpretation as we look at this one. A certain piece of this grabbed me. Let's take a quick look at it. Boy, there's a lot of information here on this card, and it does not have that sunken over feeling of the other cards. It's pretty bright and celebratory, and it's like, hey, interplanetary internet. Interplanetary internet, IPN, stable backbone, and it shows a series of planets around. It's got JPL in there, which JPL we know is referenced as Jack Parsons Laboratory as well as the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, because Jack Parsons, using occult techniques, there's a great story. There's a series on him right now on CBS called Strange Angel, where we find out a great deal about him, but it's been on the record for a while that he was a major Crowley student, and he's also responsible for our rocket program. And over again, we get that overlap. When we get into aeronautics, there's always this weird occult piece that goes with it. What is that?
That's the whole, I think that's honestly the holy grail. I think everything leads to spirit. I think emotions lead to spirit. I think our mind eventually leads to spirit. I think everything leads to spirit because we're always being fed by it and nourished by it. And I think eventually we even try to merge, matter with spirit, which is really what every spiritual person's trying to do. But they're just doing it in a way that's completely from ego. This card is really bizarre. I'm not sure what the IG stands for.
Internet gateways is what they're saying. Interplanetary gateways.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which is unusual. And the question is, do we already have them? In other words, this whole hubbub about the secret space program, in fact, is the idea that they needed something, they needed to be able to have a presence on Mars to get to be the first person to have interplanetary internet set up. I mean, it's quite interesting to think about what's going on. They seem to be indicating that, and they're celebrating it in this card. It's actually probably the only happy card in the whole deck. But NASA is on there. I thought that was interesting. I mean, obviously with interplanetary internet, but you've got JPL and NASA on the bottom, but DARPA on the top. And DARPA is, again, this kind of, it's the sort of ruthless cyber robot automation of warfare. So it's a mixed message.
It's just like about control. Like once we have control over the planet with all of our robots, let's just go to the interplanetary internet too.
Right. We'll control that as well. Space fence, here we come. All right, Miss Olivia.
Yeah, it's just like all about control.
So Griffin Eagle 7 wants to know, what did the CERN scientist mean by helter-skelter?
Well, what's the reference? Are you speaking about the scientists who came forward and were challenging them on Strangelets? Or they came out with their own statement referencing helter-skelter. I'll tell you what's interesting. I think that's a reference to that they think they're developing something, which is a new particle. And guess what they call the particle? Olivia, you'll never guess what they call it.
I have no idea. The X particle?
The X particle. This is what CERN is developing. And it's all the rage. And oh, we found something that wasn't there before. It was right between the regular particles that we look at, and it's the X particle. So, you know, are we observing the series, or is the series writing real life here on the X Steganography series? It's getting quite unusual when we get around CERN. There's a little bit of that feeling that they're very, very tapped in to the X reality and the idea of the X steganography and the X technology that is associated with it. So I think we're getting something very unusual there. So that would be my take on the Helter Skelter, which is the X particle is what they're referring to there. What do you think of that, Gigi? Would you say that, you know, is CERN going to become this kind of the Ministry of Science here? Or is this the leading edge now? Because it seems to me they're almost setting it up as a governing body.
Yeah, well, they're making it so everything's about, you know, cybernetics and all these technologies, and then they control those technologies, obviously. So
That's right. How many times do these cards say cybernetics? It's amazing.
It's everywhere. If it's not cybernetics, it's psychedelics. It's really paints a picture of what they value and what they hold as the holy grail for society. They view in these cards, they view cybernetics as oneness. They view hooking up their interpretation of oneness, which is traditionally, you know, for thousands of years, has been connecting on such a deep spiritual level that you recognize that we're all the same, this very deep oneness that you recognize in everything and everyone. And they've taken that concept and perverted it and inverted it, distorted it to be that we're all hooked up to a computer system. And we get this, we dream share. And we all are interconnected to like one brain or something.
That's interesting too, the dream sharing part. Wow, fantastic. Olivia.
Okay, that brings me to a cult fan who wants to know, is CERN acting as a synchrotron, attempting to force or manipulate synchronicities or sync us into one rhythmic pattern, syncing our consciousnesses up together?
Gigi, that's definitely.
Well, I think it's important when we talk about something like CERN that they can only work within a certain echelon, a certain part of reality. They don't control reality. They don't control everything. They control a certain frequency and a certain part, and human beings can choose to resonate within that part or outside the part. And where they're pulling from would be considered like a lower dimensional, kind of lower astral. And I can tell that with certainty by the bleakness of these cards and what they're doing here. I mean, they're not very enlightened cards. So they're not really able to control in a big way consciousness in that sense. But I think that that's probably creating a new rhythm that we would all entrain with. I think that that's a great observation. I hadn't thought of that, but that's a brilliant observation. I think that they use it very precisely at times with precision. And I think that they use it also in a grander sense. And that's kind of what I would say there.
Wow. That's a great, really fantastic answer. I like the idea that they think that they can create this one version, this one rhythm of a new reality and bring that in. And in fact, over and over again, as we've found, you know, it's the best laid plans that they have. Every time they try to install this global control grid, there's always something that people do to kind of freak them out, or something unexpected happens. It's very odd. But I think, you know, I had this conversation with a professor fairly recently. And he was telling me, so what? You know, since the Romans and before that, there've always been bigger groups trying to control things. And you're just getting a modern version of that with the elites. I mean, we're talking in a broader scope beyond CERN. But I said, well, and I think I stopped him in his tracks a little bit. I said, they never had this kind of technology. So it's true that, we've had the Hitlers and we've had the people trying to control the planet before, and we've had Genghis Khan and things like that. But this is different because those groups never had technology like this. I mean, they would have died and gone to heaven to get technology like this. So the technology itself has to be understood on a different level. We can't, well, we have to embrace the technology and get the most out of it. And, a lot of my own background is in technology, so I'm not against technology. What I'm trying to say is that we have to get a handle on it before we're surrounded by driverless cars, robot bartenders, and a really kind of transhumanist approach, because right now we're still in charge. And this idea that, they're going to thunder down with robotics, get rid of all the regular workers and everything else. It was interesting. So I think I stumped the professor a little bit because he had been thinking in this fog about like, well, we've had these great movements before that try to control the world, big deal. The technology is a huge factor, and the X part of the technology, which is incredibly advanced beyond anything that we can see on the surface, those are the types of things I think leading the awareness charge on this. CERN is a good example of something that we can get a handle on by researching on it and calling it out.
Yeah, 100%. And people, we can compare with history and get a good idea about what the future is going to be like. But also, every cycle compounds upon itself. We take what worked and you can become very, very dangerous. So you can't always use, because it didn't work in the past, it's not going to work now. Well, everything compounds, the knowledge compounds. So it does kind of usually reach in a crescendo like Atlantis as well. We can't just rest on our laurels. That's lazy. That's not even thinking. That's laziness. That's lazy thinking. By not looking at the nuances, by not really researching it, by not looking at it, that's laziness. And that's what robots are too. Robots are just, they promote laziness. That's how I feel.
Don't you know they're going to make everything into this nirvana where no one has to work and they'll serve us? It'll be great, Gigi.
No, get rid of your robot floor sweepers.
They're out of there. Miss Olivia.
Mary Cox, do you think CERN causes the Mandela effect?
It's a really interesting question. I'll tell you that time displacement is something that takes place in the UFO file. So when you get to the Mandela effect, which is when things change as how we know them in history, by the way, about 95% of those cases are completely debunkable. There's a small little fraction where something has been altered, and in the past that people remember being there. And a few of those really are genuine cases. So it's worth looking at the Mandela effect, although it's hyped and overblown. And I always get the one where people say, well, originally there were only 4 people in the Kennedy car. Now there's 6, or the other way around. Originally there was 4 and 6. In fact, there were always 6 people in the car, so let's put that one to bed. But it is interesting about this because I talked with Joseph Farrell about this, who really looks at physics and thinks of them as occultists working as physicists. He thinks that they have this kind of background. And what he said is that, it seems like it's almost like an experiment with the medium, that if they can play with the medium of reality, there's something in physics where you watching something changes the actual physics of what it is. So your observation becomes part of the equation. So if I can have you look at something differently, I mean, we know they do this in propaganda anyway, right? All the way back to the Kennedy assassination and the magic bullet and things like that. But if I can change your perception about an event, then I can actually change the event. That's the experiment. But I don't know. What do you think of those things, time displacement and the Mandela effect in relation to CERN?
Yeah, so I don't think that CERN actually is creating the Mandela effect. I think when something becomes mysterious, we automatically want to project everything good and bad onto it as though it's creating it. It's, the man behind the curtain. I don't think that it is. I do think that outside of CERN, we are in a time of a quickening and our consciousness changing. And I think when that happens, we switch timelines more rapidly, and we also get past that change. And it's actually an effect of consciousness. And consciousness is really, really important because it's kind of the answer here. You just said that, you know, they use people's perception to control. Well, that's why they're hiding CERN. They don't want people to perceive CERN.
Right.
They don't want that perception on CERN and everything that it's doing. So that's why they're doing everything they can to hide it, because that's what they're doing. And also remember that what CERN is doing, it is merging with consciousness and affecting consciousness. So how you hold your consciousness and your awareness affects how CERN works.
Oh, it's not interesting.
If CERN is working with the fabric of consciousness, of light, of our being, of reality, and there is a point where it blends into one, then we have a say in that. And I'm sure that the more ignorant we are, the better that technology works. And I'm sure the more awake we are, and the more we poke, and the more we prod, and the more we bring our attention, then I'm sure the less that thing works. I'm sure it's more unpredictable, and I'm sure that things don't happen right, because that's the level that they're working on, is that level of consciousness. And it's so important to know that.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's a really good point about how we're creating the reality. Gigi, thoughts are things?
Thoughts are things. Thoughts are things. Everything that you see around you in the material world. And I'm not talking about The Secret. I'm talking about metaphysics. The Secret is silly. I mean, this is metaphysics. You know, whatever is around you in the material world began as a spirit, as thought, was ushered in by emotions. That's how we create the reality around us. That's the holistic view of everything. Thoughts are things. And that's why psychics can read them, people can read them. That's why when you walk into a room and someone's just been told that they won the lottery, you can feel it even though everyone's sitting there. There's a palpability to these things that from 3D we can sense. But when you start getting into those upper realms, they're very real things.
Absolutely. Gigi, you mentioned the lottery again. Something's going on here.
I bought a lottery ticket when the didn't win. I didn't pick the numbers, but of course I got like 2 or something. I didn't pick them, but I totally bought one. It's the only time I'd ever did it.
Yeah. Well, it was a worthy effort. Let's face it. We'll build our own CERN right here. It'll be the opposite CERN. Take it out. Miss Olivia.
Okay, so Georgi Bonkovich wants to know CERN's connection to D-Wave.
Well, CERN is actually based on it's based on the Klystron technology. Okay, so I've gone into great depth. I wonder if I have their picture here. Hang on a second. You know me, I can't really connect ideas without the pictures. That's the way it works. The picture is, the thing I just pulled out is Marvel Comics opposed trademark from Alien Conspiracy. Oh, I wonder who that could be. Thank you. Yes, our friends in Blue Chicken Paradise got into trademark trouble with Marvel Comics, which is a great bookend to our episode the other week. But back to this show. By the way, there's one of your relatives there, Gigi.
Yeah.
Very important man, Mr. Corson, sitting with the early council of NASA called NACA. And of course, that's Von Braun right there. Pretty edgy group right here. Some of the most advanced scientists in the world. I guess they could do their own Macy's conference right there at that table. The gentleman we were looking for, Russell and Sigurd Varian, the Varian brothers, who star in the X series quite often for their interesting developments. Both of them came out of the Halcyon Temple, which is the Theosophical Society branch that Annie Besant helped to craft with their dad, John Varian. It's their breakthrough that gave us the foundation for CERN. As a matter of fact, I have an ad of theirs from 1938 where they're selling one of these Klystron units, and it looks like a vacuum cleaner. It's like, here, buy your own particle accelerator and do scientific experiments with it. So they gave it to us. And also, I should say, it's not Eugene Corson. It's the other Corson that he also participated in developing CERN. So your story is getting more and more interesting by the minute, Gigi. But I think what is interesting here is that's the foundation of it. The D wave, and where I think we get a comparison going in quantum computing, that thing is going to revolutionize every kind of computing you can imagine, because its speed of development, its rapid solving of equations, and all the rest of it is, it's so far advanced. One of the tricks to the D wave is that it needs to be kept in space cold temperature. And that's the one I was talking about where they came out with the high priests and they're like, and it's this little weird chip. But also at CERN, they developed conditions at Alice, the other particle collider that's connected to CERN in France. They develop conditions that are colder than space, just like the D wave requires. But at CERN, on the other end of that pipeline, they develop conditions that are hotter than the sun. So to dismiss it as just kind of a mild scientific program, like, let's see what they come up with, they're creating conditions of space and the sun from France to Switzerland. The environmental impact of that is probably worth taking a really good look at. So that's how I would compare D-Wave to CERN, which is the incredibly cold temperatures that are required to operate it. But yeah, great question. Keep rolling.
Okay, Najat Madri. Could CERN use 5G to transmit subliminal messages and mind control? And Jonathan Fries wants to know, what's up with the voice of God tech? Any connection to CERN?
That's interesting about voice to God technology, voice to skull technology, Gigi. It's interesting because inside we have the ability to reach out and touch spiritually these meditation, these concepts, and the kind of work that you do remarkably. You can get in touch with guides and situations and hear things. One of the remarkable things that you did during this study is you started hearing the sound of the CERN thing when we were working on this. You were getting the actual rush of the sound.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at it from this perspective, they have technology now where they can kind of invade your consciousness with a voice, and you'd think maybe it's a spiritual voice or whatever. How do you tell the difference?
So these technologies seem very, very advanced, but they can only function within a certain spectrum. So these technologies usually work on people who are in very deep states of depression, confusion, and your whole bioenergetic field, which is basically your mind and your emotions, has to be in a certain state for entrainment to happen, and I guess it'd be like the auditory cortex to be stimulated, and or however that technology works, I'm not sure, but I do know that it would have to be within a certain spectrum of thought and emotion, and that's why some of the most important things that you can do, like we were saying earlier, is to have a very strong spiritual practice, go outdoors, things like that. There's certain things that you can do that help you not be in a space like that, where you're susceptible to these kind of things. They do exist, but they can only operate within a certain spectrum. And so you want to be very aware of what you're thinking and what you're feeling.
Wow. The thoughts are things. That's actually a barrier if your thoughts are in a certain state. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think it's interesting. You've described a vulnerability there, which is a certain state that you're at when you're more vulnerable to V2K technology. That's interesting to me because it does seem like the kind of thing that would only work under certain conditions. I think that's a great breakthrough you have there.
We don't actually realize how coherence works. Like when we're in line with our heart, the Heart Math Institute's doing a great job with coherence, and how the heart and the brain connect, and the body starts actually vibrating at a very fast harmonic, and the brain starts functioning. The brain starts just functioning differently, cycling differently. How you think and feel actually changes completely how you are resonating. And so you can create a shield around you so that you're not. in that place. And so anytime these things are discussed, I always like to bring that up, because part of it is just being afraid, you know, living in fear and things like that. That's what perpetuates that and allows, and it's honestly not just a voice to God or whatever it's
Voice
called.
to skull. Yeah. The voice of God, voice to skull. It's
yeah. There's also other things you can tune into there as well, like false light beings, and there's all sorts of things that you attract and can get into your life if you maintain these things. So
wow, really fascinating. It's a great observation. Gigi, fantastic stuff tonight. We're going to take the last questions. Happy Halloween, everyone. This has been fantastic. And yes, I have my mask ready. We're gonna end this in mask outfits. But before we go on this, let's take a couple of final questions. I want to remind everyone, you're watching Dark Journalist, and I'm here with Gigi Young. Wow, Gigi's making a great contribution to our work here on the X series. And I have to say, you know, when you get into this kind of thing, if you don't have someone who has that sensitivity, who doesn't have that vision, the ability to be retrocognitive and all the rest of it, you won't really get as far as you could, because I can do, you know, I can work with academic experts, I can work with historians, I can work with people. There's something very special that Gigi can do in relation to this, which is, and it's so much of it is in her work. But so many of the things when we go after the mystery schools, dealing with the X Steganography, dealing with the government groups, you need somebody. They have those groups of people working for them. So they have the psychic sensitives and all the rest of it. If we don't have that on our side, it's a great deficit. And Gigi's making up the deficit. And her work is quite remarkable. I invite everyone to check out gigiyoung.com. It's exceptional. And of course, Gigi's work on YouTube as well.
thank you.
Miss Olivia.
Okay, I'm going to pivot. So, Gigi, what kind of meditation do you recommend for developing your psychic abilities?
Yeah.
It depends. Yeah, this is a big one. It depends what kind of person you are. We all have different abilities. We're all starting from a different place. I would say if you are a more earthy person and you are really in your body, I would say you want to focus more on things that bring you out of your body, kind of more cosmically, kind of bringing up here. And then if you want to, if you're more of like a naturally psychic heady person, then you want to bring it back down. So I would say it depends on who you are, but no matter what you're doing, the number one thing to do in the beginning is to be an observer, to get very, 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 very good at observing and not and developing that space as an observer, because that's the space that you hold as a psychic, is an observer, rather than just being so into it, into everything. Does that make sense? I hope so. But
yes.
Excellent. Wow. So you're saying basically it's going to be a different thing for different people, but would you say the first thing is that relationship with, you know, they call it the still voice inside?
Exactly. You want to create that space between you and being reactive and observing. That is key. That's what so just passive meditation, passive observing, thoughts coming in, where you're just observing everything. That's the ideal space, because that's actually what's going to keep you safe in all the work that you're doing. It's going to keep it clear as well.
Wow, absolutely. Olivia, fix that mask.
Is there something wrong with the mask?
I think that it's...
Oh, I figure. Okay.
Yes.
All right, I'll figure.
Fantastic.
All right, so Andrew Powers wants to know, and I think there are probably a lot of people in the audience who are curious about this. It says, Gigi, I'm a musician. I was wondering, I self-medicate with marijuana in replacement of actual drugs. Should I stop smoking every day?
Okay, so my question for you, first of all, is hi, thank you for being here. And so the first thing is can you create the same sensation that you get when you smoke pot? Can you create that in your body? Can you create the feeling in your physical body? Can you create that warmth in your emotional body? And can you relax the mind? So can you recreate the sensation that substance gives you? Because that's what that's there for. It's not that we should never do these things, but it's there to give you a reference point so that you can create it on your own. And I promise you that if you can do that, and if you work to do that and cut back and create that within your own self, that you will have a way better, more sustained high, and just it'll be so much better. You can access it at any time much quicker. It'll be so much better.
Wow. Well, happy Halloween, everyone. This has been incredible. Gigi's headdress beats my mask, but next year I'm going to have a rematch. This is, I want to see this. And Gigi, since we have our masks on, or accoutrement, how about a prediction for 2019?
2019. I haven't even thought. I can't even believe that we're here. I think that we're gonna see, I think that because you've been covering Corey Good and all this kind of stuff, I think we're gonna see more of a ringing out of the spiritual community. And I think we're gonna be going through it with a fine-tooth comb. And I think we're gonna see a real move, a real push towards truth and authenticity there. And I think it's gonna also be a crazy election cycle again. And I think certain topics are gonna get covered that maybe I'll talk about at a different date. But yeah, I think we're in for a pretty wild ride, especially in our community. I think we're going to be weeding people out more. I think we're just seeing the beginning of that.
Wow, incredible. It's time to clear the decks and clean the place up. I love that. Fantastic. And you're just the woman for the job. Gigi, I can tell, for example, these guys with their Marvel Comics trademark violation, now they're going to say, aha, the Dark Alliance has their masks on. They're after me.
They're going to screenshot that. And
this is it. We did the cards. We cracked into them tonight. Fantastic work by Gigi Young on a very, very crucial topic. And I've said that I've invited the artist of these cards onto the show. I hope she accepts the invitation. And I'd love to hear more about how they were developed. We're going to do more on it, and we're going to bring Gigi back soon, because we're going deep on the X series. Remember, sign up for the newsletter at darkjournalist.com. That keeps us in touch with each other. And also, as far as it goes, you know, like, support the show, get behind it, get behind the things that are giving you the real information, and leave the things behind that are polluting the space or developing confusion. It's a great thing. The people are here. I've pointed out the people over and over again, and one of them is here tonight, which is Gigi Young. Get behind the work that she's doing and the things that we're doing here at Dark Journalist. Miss Olivia, you get the last word.
Well, Bo Krills said, didn't a squirrel interrupt or stop one of Cern's experiments? I guess twice. Have you heard that?
You know, it's interesting. It doesn't surprise me. So. Well, hey, a squirrel's organic, right? Right off the bat. I remember it was that the guy who developed orgone. I forget his name right now, but it's not Rorik, but it's Nicholas. And one of the things that they stopped him was because he was seeding these clouds with his unusual devices. And whenever you get organic things mixed, it messes the system up. And one of the things that they wanted to do when they developed Cern is like HARP, in a sense. You know, they wanted to create this thing, and every once in a while this organic thing would come along and just mess them up. So, yeah, great.
Wilhelm Reich.
Yes, fantastic. It was Reich.
Also,
and the energy is orgone, which is his very unique thing. The only thing that's interesting about him, beyond his very unusual career, is the extent to which they tried to destroy and rub out his legacy of scientific research, I think, is quite remarkable. So to you Reichian people out there, fantastic. One of the things I forgot to mention about the deck, Gigi Young noticed this. The only reference to aliens in here were about Raelians. A very unusual, somewhat discredited group who acts, you know, in history like a cult around UFOs. How odd is that?
That's, I mean, out of all the things that could be chosen, Ashtar Command, I don't know.
True. Excellent choice. Fantastic. Gigi, thank you so much. Excellent work. And I look forward to continuing with you on the X series. You're just outstanding, and a real pleasure and a real benefit for all of us here who are interested in the topic.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
It's great to see you. And we're going to have you back soon.
Yep.
For sure. Happy Halloween, everyone. Miss Olivia, as usual, you get the final word of the evening.
Well, Breach123 was asking where she can get the Hexen 2.0 tarot cards.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to do an episode. It's fascinating. We're going to do one coming up on this, the second round. And when we do that, we're going to actually give away a deck of the cards with the book. And that'll be a good way for you to get it. So we'll announce that. We're going to do it next time. We almost did it this time, but we didn't get them in time. But next time we're going to have them ready, and we'll give away a set. There are versions available online and all the rest of it. Obviously, we got our hands on them, but they're getting more rare.
They're rare. They're very expensive. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're very unusual. Of course, a lot of them are available for viewing. You can still see a lot of the cards online as it is. So that's kind of the inexpensive way out. Thank you, everyone. Happy Halloween 2018. What a fantastic show. Unbelievable guest, and Olivia. And when I say Olivia gets the last word, you don't have to ask a question now. Just tell us what's on your mind.
There's a million questions that we did not
We'll get to them.
tonight,
We will eventually.
But I promise you that DJ will take a look at all of them and address them next time.
I will. I would love to. I love the questions. Thank you for the dialogue. It's a fantastic audience that we have, and I always want to say that. There's great people out there. Breach123, fantastic questions. Christine Taggart, Najat, of course, always right there with the great questions. Occult fan, right on top of it. I want to mention something, since we talked about Corey Good and the Blue Chicken Cult and all the rest of it, that Teresa Narrows, who's a journalist that came out of her own studies and worked sometimes with that group, has come forward and resigned from that group for her own reasons. And she is actually on Friday is going to be coming out and making a live statement. And so in our social media, we'll provide a link to that. I have great respect for Teresa's work as a journalist, and the fact that she stood up during the No SSP trademark campaign. She really, showed the kind of incredible courage that it takes when you're around people who don't share your values, I guess I would say. And she did stood up and showed her independence, and I think everyone should support her in that effort. And I look forward to hear her side of the story there on Friday. It's a live stream that'll be worth tuning into, and we'll be covering it, of course. And Teresa, good going. You're doing something great there. So everyone, we will see you on next week. And on Friday, we'll have something special for you also. So thank you so much, and have a great night. The only question left is what's for Halloween dinner?
Mac and cheese tonight. What do you say?
I like the sound of that. But there has to be something fun in the middle of it. I mean, look at that mask.
I'm exhausted. I just want comfort food and go to bed.
Wow, unbelievable. Gigi, have a great Halloween over there.
Good night.
Are you gonna go trick or treating in that outfit?
People will lock their doors if
It's a little bit. It's kind of Egyptian. It's kind of Cern. I think you had the vibe just right.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Good night, everybody.
I could have played Thriller at the end with Vincent Price, but.